No pressure, Jason. Okay, well, start your engines. First of all, I want to acknowledge that we are on the traditional territories of the Coast Salish people, in particular the Qualicum First Nation. Here we have the agenda, but we need to make an amendment, and it's prior to the financial plan, prior to 7A, and that is a presentation regarding the Seacrest Place Slope Stabilization Project. So if I could call on you to make that into an item just prior to the financial plan. And then a minor one on the adoption of the consent agenda. It says recommendations listed for items 2A to 2C. That's supposed to be a D, because we go to D. So with that, any other changes to the agenda? Then the agenda is adopted as amended. And the first item is then the adoption of the consent agenda. And they're mostly minutes of meetings. Any changes to the minutes or errors? Councillor Skipsey?
I had a couple of items under the correspondence log that I wanted to raise. So.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay, thank you. So the first one is the first item of correspondence regarding the traffic in and out of the Shell station from Memorial Avenue. And it says it's received for information, and I would like to see this referred to our traffic consultant and/or the community transportation plan. So I don't know if a notice of motion is required to do that at the next meeting, or how we're...
Well, it's a little bit awkward because we don't have the letter in front of us. We should pull those letters under correspondence when we want to speak to them. Mm-hmm. But however, I read the letter and I understand the significance of the concern. So would staff be comfortable if we refer this to accordingly? Can you repeat your motion?
Well, I would refer the item of correspondence 585 to our traffic consultant for further consideration.
Okay, would council agree with that? Is it by consent? Okay, that's approved by consent. Okay. Anything else?
Well, the second one was regarding the animal control bylaw and the ponderings around licensing of dogs and not cats and whatnot. And I think there was a desire for that to go to strategic planning this fall. And I just wondered if a motion was required or whether just the ask is sufficient.
I've asked to be considered under strategic planning session this fall.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, that's
Councillor Harrison?
Yeah, so just one question is that usually this is a section where we have things like the reports on bylaws and building reports, and I'm just wondering, when are we going to get the year-end sort of building report? Because I do think it's sort of important information to look at that year-end total of things.
Thank you. Ms. Varela?
Thank you, Your Worship. So we have shifted that to a quarterly reporting, so I can speak with staff to say when is the next one coming forward that closes off 2024. Very good point. So thank you, Your Worship.
Thank you. Anything else? Then the consent agenda is approved by consent. Business arrived in minutes. Councillor Skipsey.
Okay, so just, there was a delegation at the December 11th meeting, and I wanted to make this motion just for the sake of clarity and assurance purposes. So it is to refer the presentation on the tree protection bylaw by the Friends of the Qualicum Beach Forest that be referred to staff for consideration during the upcoming tree protection bylaw review process.
Yeah, so actually, I disagree with that because the reason we're doing this review is that we essentially had a small group of people and Council Rester threw it in basically a day. And I think when we're dealing with the consultant, the correspondence to refer to them would actually be the committee of the whole, where the whole community got a chance to speak, including, I think, the individuals for that. And I'd really want to avoid giving the suggestion to the consultant that we want a particular outcome prior to hearing from what they think should be done with that. So I'd actually prefer that we refer the committee of the whole meeting to the consultant rather than one individual piece of correspondence from one group.
Thank you. Councillor Young.
Can I get clarification whether we're going to have a consultant or will we just go by the recommendations of the Friends of the Forest?
No, I decided to get a consultant. Any discussion on Councillor Harrison's point? Councillor Skipsey?
You know, I just think there were some good points made, and it's just for consideration. It's not asking that these necessarily be included, but just for the information and consideration of the consultant.
Yeah, I do think that when we get the consultant engaged, that he would hear from these people, because they're not backwards coming forward with their thoughts on the tree bylaw. So I think it's almost a foregone conclusion that people, the ones that spoke during the committee of the whole meeting, will also be responding to the consultant in any case. So it may be redundant to make this motion.
Yeah, that may be. I just wanted, I guess for the sake of clarity, that this would be considered. I think that the presentation was very concise, and if they send it or we send it, it doesn't really matter as long as it's considered by the consultant.
Yeah, I do think that we need to hear from everyone at equal opportunities, and this does feel that they're getting a bit ahead of the queue. So I agree with Councillor Harrison. This is probably not a motion necessary, but they will hear from these folks in any case. Councillor Harrison?
And I know for something like this, there'd be a lot of public outreach, but maybe if staff want to reach out when we have more details to this group, so they can participate. I mean, the goal isn't to prevent them from participating. They should have a voice, absolutely. It's just we want to make sure that we're not accidentally putting our thumb on the scale or the consultant feels. Just past few days, some of the feedback from the quality of life survey I've heard from random citizens is, oh, they made it so they get the answers they want. And I really want to avoid that impression. I don't think that was our intent, by the way, but you know, no. I just want to avoid that as much as possible.
So on the motion, on the screen, further discussion? All in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. We'll start with the bylaws, but before the bylaws, I asked you to allow me to change the agenda, adopt the agenda change by talking about the Seacrest Place Slope Stabilization Project. Ms. Varela, who would you like to start off with that?
Your Worship, if you just flip to page 2 of your agenda. Sorry about that.
Yeah, I'm not that big of a hurry. I'm sorry. The page is stuck together because of some coffee stain. Anyway, I'm sorry about that. Sure got your attention, though. So on the AVICC resolution, who would like to make that motion? Pardon? Okay, moved, seconded. Councillor Skipsey. Discussion, Councillor Harrison.
So I think one half of this totally I'm in agreement with, absolutely. The other half I have a very large question mark, and that's where it says to stop railway maintenance traffic. So would this then be if Island Corridor Foundation has vehicles that are trying to maintain the corridor, would this motion essentially prevent that from happening? Because I don't think that's in our interest.
I think go ahead, Ms. Rilla.
Sorry, Your Worship. I think the intention is meant to say physically stop. It's not to say don't have maintenance vehicles on the railway. So, including the guiding the grade crossing regulations to permit the reconfiguration of railway crossing traffic controls to physically stop railway maintenance traffic on the, so it would be
Yeah.
them that came to the stop sign, not
Yeah.
the vehicles on the roadway. Sorry,
Yeah.
Your Worship.
We had some very enterprising folks who actually turned the stop sign around so that the train, the car, the maintenance vehicles would stop. So, but we're actually asking to do that because there's so little traffic and people, I believe, inherently don't like breaking the law. And when they see a stop sign at a railway crossing where they know there's not going to be a train, it's really hard to stop, and so they go through it. And then when they see the next stop sign by First Avenue, they go, well, they didn't stop for that one, so we'll just blow through that one. It makes people uncomfortable. It does me. I know I should stop, and I do, because people know my car, and I go, well, the mayor drives right through it. So I have to stop, but I think we should try and find a better way. Councillor Harrison.
Yeah, so I just think that by including the first part, I think the federal government in this case probably, because I think it ultimately is going to be going to Transport Canada, they'll say that'll set a precedent, and we don't want to set a precedent. And so that's why I think having this conversation about the inactive railway crossings, it is inactive. It's already been severed. The Nanoos Nation, Snanas, has already got their land back. So there's no traffic really, other than once a year someone drives by to clean out the brush and check to see the state of things. So I just suggest we might want to amend this to just get rid of that one sentence, just because, forgive me, I can see a bureaucrat saying, aha, here's the one thing I disagree with, so I can make it all go away and not deal with
No,
this.
I agree, and we'll amend that so it makes more sense about the stopping. Ms. Rilla?
Thank you, Your Worship. So if Council would entertain, therefore be it resolved that AVICC and UBCM lobby Transport Canada for the amendment of the legislation, including the grade crossings regulation, to permit the reconfiguration of railway crossing traffic controls to have railway maintenance traffic come to a stop on the rail at roadway intersections of inactive railway crossings, and to remove stop signs for vehicular traffic at these locations.
I think that sounds basically to address the concern. So, Councillor, agree with that?
I would have done it slightly differently, but I do strongly agree with the first part. I just think anything to do with railway traffic, they're going to seize on and use as a reason to say, thank you for your email, but no. So with that first part, I'm just not on board with that, but the second part I strongly support.
Okay, so on the amendment that Ms. Varela just read out, and we've got the amendment? Okay, all in favor of the amendment? Opposed? Councillor Harrison opposed. The resolution as amended. All in favor? Opposed? Are you opposed?
I think, sure, we'll send a letter out. I have a hunch what the response will be, but might as well try.
Thank you. So that carried unanimously. Thank you. Then we have delegations, and the first one is Mr. Scott from the Eaglecrest Residents Association. Mr. Scott, you have up to 5 minutes.
Good morning, Mayor Westbrook and councillors. I'm Bill Scott, and I'm joined by Susan Lloyd, and Gerd Flesner, representing the Board of Directors of the Eaglecrest Residents Association, and we bring to you greetings and best wishes. Last November the 12th, there was a standing room only delegation in the Lions Room of the Civic Center of for our annual general meeting. And this was the first time in 32 years that an annual general meeting had been held off premises of the Eaglecrest Golf Course. Many of our annual social events, such as our Christmas Mingle and Jingle, St. Patrick's Day dinner, and summer barbecue, were canceled due to the uncertain availability or closure of the banquet facilities in the clubhouse. Although we were successful in holding a day at the North Island Wildlife Recovery Center, our annual community garage sale, and our Canada Day neighborhood gatherings. But sadly, our August beach day lost out to inclement weather. Our financial position is sound, with a growing membership that remains strong, engaged, and supportive. Facing an alarming increase in conflicting and misinformed rumors regarding the future of the Eaglecrest Golf Course, a factual overview of the current legislation governing its lands was given, and it included the official community plan, applicable land use bylaws and permitted uses, the restricted covenant applicable to a portion of the lands, and the public process in amending or replacing land use bylaws and/or their rules. This meeting was open to the floor for questions and comments, the tenor of which can only be described as one of great angst, an angst fueled by a poorly informed rumor mill in the absence of any open or transparent dialogue with either Semiahmoo, the golf course owners, or the town. Each comment brought a stark reminder that with the uncertain future of the golf course operation and its lands, there is a deepening trust erosion with both the owners of Semiahmoo and the town, not to mention a toll on the psyche of our residents. The residents are understandably frustrated and anxious and have lost confidence in the owners of the golf course as it continues with a knee-jerk on-again, off-again approach to the operations of the facilities, along with periodic threats of permanent closure. It's been no secret that all owners of the golf course have eventually sought to develop the lands, and for many of us here, including many on council, today is déjà vu. A half-century ago, the Eaglecrest subdivision was created surrounding a golf course on recreational lands, which were then, as they are now, regarded as important and valuable green space. The town's official community plan states Eaglecrest golf course lands are part of the town's extensive green space and should be protected in perpetuity. During the first years of operation by the new owners, the town issued a number of communications in the form of FAQs and letters stating in part, there is no policy to support further development of the Eaglecrest golf course. This has been communicated to the owners of the Semiahmoo Golf Centre Limited numerous times over the past few years. And also, both staff and council are acutely aware that the neighborhood and community strongly values the current environmental status of the subject lands and the character of the Eaglecrest neighborhood that holds Eaglecrest course at its center. However, the ARA recently received a letter from the town containing the statement, the town continues to have discussions with the representatives of the ownership of the Eaglecrest golf course, which has been followed by a series of special council meetings closed to the public for the purpose of considering the acquisition, disposition, or expropriation of land or improvements. This has led to speculation that these meetings are about the Eaglecrest golf course. And now, with the official community plan under review, will the Eaglecrest golf course lands remain part of the town's extensive green space that should be protected in perpetuity? It was a consensus of the AGM that there should be no use of the Eaglecrest golf course lands, active or dormant, for anything other than a golf course facility on recreational lands. As an interesting side note, despite COVID, weak economic conditions, and staff issues, all of Oceanside's other 4 golf courses continue to flourish with full tee sheets, extended membership lists, and quality dining facilities. And in conclusion, the Eaglecrest golf course was purchased as a viable, ongoing business which has successfully served the social and recreational needs of Qualicum Beach for more than half a century. This is a legacy that must continue regardless of ownership. On behalf of everyone who values these historic recreational lands and the quality of life they bring to Qualicum Beach, we thank you for your attention and due consideration of the community's sentiments. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Scott. Any questions to the delegation? Councillor Harrison.
Just 2 questions. One, roughly how many members does the Residents Association have at present?
Last year we ended around 273, and we're rapidly increasing that as this year continues.
Okay. And secondly, have you reached out to the ownership group of the golf course with any of the concerns you mentioned in your presentation?
We have attempted in numerous times with deafening silence.
Any other comments or questions? Well, thank you, Mr. Scott. The next delegation is from the Qualicum Beach Chamber of Commerce, Danielle Novak. Danielle, you have up to 5 minutes.
There we go. And so many electronics. Good morning, Daniela Novak, President of the Qualicum Beach Chamber of Commerce. So I do have a PowerPoint presentation just to my right. We have decided to really focus on the visitor center activities for you today. I can tell you I do have a little bit of pepperings of the Chamber of Commerce for you as well. And hopefully I can make this work. Yes, I can. Look at that. So first, I'm going to focus on our activities down at the Visitor Center. Maybe I won't be. There we go. So predominantly, we've been active with our social media posting, outreach and events, volunteerism, best of and to-do list creation. So what are we doing really well now? What should we stop, start, and continue in the future? Creating business profiles of our existing business members, and what I will say is that our membership at the Chamber of Commerce is growing exponentially. So we started, when I first came on board, we had less than 120 members. We are up around 200 now, and we continue to grow. And those members are existing businesses, as well as folks who left us and are now coming back. Grassroots marketing, so we're trying some new things as the evolution of marketing a business changes or happens. We have sought to change us as well. So what does that look like? And web page creation. So if you have gone onto our website, you will see that it has changed significantly. Activities summary. So we do employ 4 students every year. 3 of the students this year were repeats to us. So this is their second year with us. Some of them are requesting to come back next year as well. We also have volunteers, so folks from the community who help staff the visitor center and the kiosk. Our volunteers and students, they actively live post where they are, what they're doing. They go to whatever event might be happening in the community. They go out to other events, not necessarily just Qualicum Beach. So the Coombs annual fair, as an example, they would be there as well, because Coombs, surprise, surprise, is in our catchment of the Qualicum Beach Chamber of Commerce. A few other activities that we did this year, we did receive some complaints from some of our members that people were actively smoking and vaping within their entryways. So our volunteers went out and helped to distribute signs and posters to remind individuals that it still is illegal to smoke and vape within a certain boundary of your doorway. Our staff also decided to paint the sidewalks to help with directions and help folks find different businesses or different areas to grab a cup of coffee or what events were taking place. And there's one of our cute little signs. Total visitors, I think this is important. Total visitors this year to our visitor center and kiosk were 3,883. So it is a growing number, but I am going to show you in one more slide after this where our visitors are coming from, predominantly BC. So we're seeing a lot of folks who are traveling within their province, local residents, so a lot of us are wandering down to the visitor center, Alberta, other parts of Canada, and a little bit coming up from the States, but not as many, and still Europe we are a high traffic area for folks from Europe. So what are they looking for? This is a very exciting graph. If you're an analytics kind of person, you can read all that fine print. But I will tell you predominantly what they're doing is they're looking for directions. So maps, how do I get out to Englishman River Falls? How do I get out to Little Qualicum? How do I travel around the community? So they're looking for maps and directional services. By the month, this is where we get into the nitty-gritty of it. So where are we seeing our peak traffic? Of course, that would be July. We see a little bit January, February. I can tell you right now, our average visitor to the center is 2. Those are not our employees either. So 2 folks. There might be 3 today because I have to run down there. So July is our busy month. August and into September, October are also quite busy. Here's where we decided this year to really take a strong look at how that mobile kiosk is helping the visitor center. It is significant. We saw in August, so for those of you who would recall where the visitor center was, the first year we had it, we put it outside of Quality Foods. This year we put it at the clock, so right outside of CIBC at the foot of 2nd Avenue. In my personal opinion, probably the best location for it. So August is where we saw a high traffic rate happen with that visitor center. So Highway Visitor Center, meaning the one that's down on the water, 527 folks came in August. The visitor kiosk, 790. So historical visitor counts, this is important. So in 2017, we had 15,600 folks come to visit the area. You will see in COVID, 2019, it dropped significantly. 2020, it picked up a wee little bit. Last year, we saw it pick up. That is unfortunately because, well, fortunately, unfortunately, depending on how you want to look at it, because of the highway closure, folks couldn't get out to the West Coast, so they stayed here. But the important part of this slide is to recognize that we haven't really recovered from prior to COVID. Yep.
Ms. Novak, 5 minutes are up. Unless you want to wrap it up, I can ask Council for more time.
Yep. You're going to see this actually later is our proposal. So I will end it there. Really super fast.
Thank you. Any questions to the delegation? Thank you. How do you think, and nobody really knows what's going to happen with the new administration in the States. How would that affect, you think, tourism either way?
I'm sorry, could you repeat the question? I didn't hear the first part.
Since the change of administration in the United States, how will travelers react to the changes that are coming?
I think we probably will have an official language that's American. I do believe we will see a high significant or a high traffic flow coming across the border. I do.
Okay.
I still think we will. Yeah.
I like your optimism.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you for your delegation.
Thank you. Thank you.
The next delegation is from the BroomBusters, Joanne Seals. And you'll have up to 5 minutes.
Okay, thank you. And I have a delegation as well. Good morning. I'm Joanne Sales, Executive Director of BroomBusters Invasive Plant Society. And as you know, I've been here every year since 2006 and happy to see you again. So 2024, we had 600 volunteers cut broom for 6,000 hours. And 100 Parksville Qualicum Beach residents cut broom for over 1,400 hours. So BroomBusters work from Souk to Alert Bay, from Ucluelet to Coquitlam. 14 municipalities and regional districts now support BroomBusters. Why is it not working? There we go. Okay. I'm not going to spend time on talking about why this alien invasive plant is so harmful. I think that you know that. Instead, I still don't know what, this is not moving when I want it to. Okay, so we had something unusual happen. We have 60 new volunteers to sign up for BroomBusters in the first couple weeks of January. That is very, very unusual. The reason why, no doubt, is the LA fires. Maybe I need to, there we go, okay. So people are very concerned about wildfires, and there is an increase of wildfires globally, and the primary culprit is climate change. But the prolific spread of flammable alien invasive species is making wildfire a danger in places that historically had few fires. So in Hawaii, killed 101 people. The intensity and spread was attributed to buffalo grass, and that picture above there is buffalo grass, which has taken over the previous U.S. Sugar plantations. In Chile last February, it killed 134 people. The intensity and spread, again, points to non-native plantings. So grasses, shrubs, and trees that humans have introduced to new ecosystems are increasing wildfire occurrence and frequency. On Vancouver Island, our flammable invasive alien species is Scotch broom. So you're familiar with this quote. Scotch broom is a volatile flash fuel. It will increase a wildfire's fuel load, escalate the fire's intensity, compromise fire situations, and make fires more difficult to fight. I'd like to break apart why Scotch broom is so specifically dangerous using the terminology of firefighters. This is a page from FireSmart, the 13 highest risk flammable plants that we should be avoiding. There is Scotch broom right at the beginning of the list. Scotch broom increases fuel load. Okay, broom forms impenetrable, dense thickets, which create massive fuel load and increase fire intensity. These are local photos. The one on the bottom, that is not a dead broom, or excuse me, yeah, it has not been cut yet. That was actually in the landfill, which of course is gone now. Another page from FireSmart showing us how ladder fuels carry fire vertically and high continuity carries fire horizontally. So broom's dense continuous thickets do create fuel continuity. Broom thickets provide continuous fuel for a fire to continue to spread, and broom spreads densely down roads, railroad tracks, trails, farm fields, and power lines. It's a ladder fuel, and it carries fire vertically from ground level to forest canopy, from lawns into houses, from shrubs to tall trees. So broom can grow 9 to 10 feet tall, and some of the broom in the hydro lines is actually that tall. It also can carry broom up the sides of hills. So broom is a significant threat as a fire hazard for danger of urban interface fires within our region. So here we have photos on the banks of Highway 19 at the Coombs Trail, vacant lots, farms that are local. Broom is called a volatile flash fuel because it catches fire so easily, but a fire will not start without an ignition source. The U.S. Park Service estimates that 85% of their fires are human-caused. Campfires, burning of debris, malfunctioning machinery, cigarettes, fireworks, and arson. And of course, lightning is the natural cause. Eagle Creek Fire in the U.S. burned 48,000 acres in the Columbia Gorge in 2017, and it was started by a single firecracker. So most of the causes of fires we have no way of controlling, but fireworks is something that we could control during the fire season. So what are our weaknesses and what can we do to protect our communities and islands from wildfire? One major problem we have is broom on transmission lines, which greatly increases the danger that fire could spread across the island. And you see a map of the hydro lines on Vancouver Island and see how direct it is from north to south. Spread seeds to new areas, blocks escape routes, and endangers our island power supply. So just look at, these are pictures taken by a drone very close to where we are right now. Just wondering, is this a good idea? Is this the best fire prevention that we can do? Another area, which isn't directly next to Qualicum Beach, but the exit from Highway 19 going to Parksville Coombs is covered with Scotch broom. And it's a shared responsibility by Island Corridor Foundation, BC Hydro, RDN Parks, private developers, and MOTT. We're probably going to ask for a letter of support as we try to get support to clear that.
Sales, your 5 minutes are up. Can you wrap it up? Or
yes, okay, I'll go right to the end. So thank you for your support. We ask that the city continue to remove broom cut, and we ask that Qualicum Beach request BC Hydro to remove the broom on power lines in Qualicum Beach to create a fire break. And our plans for 2025 are what we usually do, and we'll keep doing it. So we can't leave this problem to future generations. Let's stop the spread of broom.
thank you, and thank you for your enthusiasm and how you can get people to come out, like 60 new members. You must have a magic wand or something to attract people to you. That's impressive. Thank you.
It was mostly the Newcomers Club, which we're grateful
to. And it's fun the way you organize teams, so you're not alone, and you're very organized. So please continue to do that, because we need this.
Yes.
Comments, questions? Mr. Councillor Harrison.
Thank you very much, Your Worship. So I know in the past we support a resolution to try to get access to those corridors for BC Hydro. Was that effective? Did you get more access, or are there any other areas where you're having a hard time getting access in our region?
Well, I think that with BC Hydro, one time talking to them, I was told that they don't control Broom because they don't get pressure from governing entities. So they're not listening to us, but I think that it has to be the municipalities that speak out, and that's why we requested, at least request, we don't want any of the Broom within the Qualicum Beach boundaries.
And as usual, we'll consider your request and get a response at the next council meeting. So we'll leave it at that. Councillor Young.
Just a couple questions. Could it be possible if we had your report in our newsletter, so that more people are aware and possibly you'll get more volunteers? Secondly, it used to be, I used to see incarcerated people picking up garbage along our highway. Is it possible that we can engage that group to help with the eliminating the Scotch broom? Third question, also, I know there's some artisans that make products from the Scotch broom. Could it turn into, be developed into a more lucrative industry for Qualicum Beach?
Those are three good suggestions. I would be in contact with you personally to talk about them.
Perhaps, and I know Stephanie Higginson is fairly new, but I think she'd be delighted to hear from you and what you can ask her to do to advance this as well.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you for the delegation.
Okay, thank you very much.
And last, and I know he walked by the hallway, Mr. Travis de Coene. There you are. Welcome, Staff Sergeant, and you can pull that mic right back up again.
There we are. Good to go. All right. Good morning, everyone. Just prepared a basically just a quick presentation for you. I've been told I have to keep it to 5 minutes. Well, we'll keep it to 5 minutes. So we'll jump over to the next slide there. Do I have a remote? Is that this? Which button am I hitting? Overview. All right, we'll quickly go over just a quick detachment update. It works out well timing-wise because it's the end of the year, so we can go over 2024. So basically, the detachment has 39 members. We did have an addition last year with Parksville adding an additional FTE, that's full-time employee. RDN, or the provincial side of the house, that's 13 employees, and Qualicum Beach provides 8. Just the breakdown of the detachment, myself, Staff Sergeant's the commander of the detachment. We have 2 sergeants that overlook the plainclothes operations and the uniform operations, 5 corporals, 1 per watch, and 1 for our GIS, or General Investigation Section. Total of 31 constables, 21 frontline. Those are the GD guys you see driving around in the marked vehicles and some unmarked vehicles. We have a plainclothes unit with the corporal there. They have some unmarked vehicles. 3 municipal traffic positions, and then IPV and missing persons. So these are our basically domestic violence and family member, 1 dedicated member to that, and we have a youth member that also does works in our school, and then a station constable. That's so we have a member in uniform at the detachment at all times through the week. 11 civilian staff, thanks to this council and Parksville. They did give us an additional civilian staff member last year. We're hoping to get that staffed actually in the next month or so, which will be very good. And last year we did go through a transition through attrition from PSEs, or public service employees, to municipal employees. So as the public service employee who was funded by a municipality retired or went off, moved, transitioned, that transitioned to a municipal employee. And that's been explained to council as we went. So thank you for that. 2 victim services who work full-time in the office, Monday to Friday, 1 restorative justice through Aerosmith Community Service. And then I'm just going to go basically break down the files. So 2023 just gives you comparison 2023 to 2024. So we did have a 5% decrease overall for total files taken for this year, for 2024. So just for our annual performance plan, so these are just our enhanced things that we do over and above just taking files. So we had so this is for the quarter, so you can see this is just for the last quarter, not for the entire year. 187 traffic contacts, that's for the entire Oceanside area, not just Qualicum Beach. 90 hours spent in school zones, that's throughout the area, and that's dedicated to traffic enforcement. 39 IRPs, so that's immediate roadside prohibitions. So that's basically impaired driving that are non-criminal. That's under the Motor Vehicle Act. So it's done roadside, and the individual is 30/90, or they'll lose their car, lose their license, and have to go through some stuff through ICBC. It's not a criminal process. One criminal code impaired, so that's when you come back, you're under arrest in theory, and you're done through the criminal code. We did attend 143 crashes, and we did unfortunately have one fatal in this last quarter. Community relations, so this Qualicum First Nations, these are attendance by generally myself or one of the sergeants. Foot patrols, a majority of those are done by me because the members are pretty tasked, so I do spend quite a bit of time in Qualicum Beach in the morning walking around. We try to focus on some of the areas that just to get people moving on before the businesses and stuff open, obviously when weather allows as well. School visits, 69 total for the quarter. Referrals to victim services, 96 referrals to victim services. For the crime reduction side of that, so we do monitor 10 individuals in the Oceanside area. So this is people that are on conditions. We do monitor them. We'll do curfew checks, stuff like that, just to make sure that they're complying with their conditions from the court. Total of 114 court compliance checks. So that's members attending. So these are over and above files. These are just members attending to speak with these individuals to making sure they're following their conditions. So obviously our partnerships, victim services is through Sources, our restorative justice is through Aerosmith, which is great, and about roughly 19 interagency meetings that I attended through the quarter, and that's stuff like this. There we are. So just to go over, a relatively successful year overall. These are just some basic stats. It kind of gives you a 6-month overview of where they are. Obviously the summer, so your July, August, they're going to be higher numbers typically. More people in town, just more things going on, more transient crime. It does give us a 6-month average. So roughly that's where they are. You can see November, December are usually pretty good months for us overall. It does have the total count. One thing I will bring of note, everybody, because I send this document out to the councils and monthly, just so they get a monthly update. Intimate partner violence, it used to be domestic violence. So you see a huge increase of 427%, 74 files for last year, 390 files for this year. So what it was, the RCMP, not so much the RCMP, it's Stats Canada decided, hey, we're not really truly representing domestic violence. It's not just domestic violence against partners or anything. This can be grandson and grandmother or anybody, right? So now it encompasses the entirety of any sort of inter-family relationship or calls or anything. So inevitably the number went way up. So what we weren't counting before is now being counted. So the number seems much, much higher. So for instance, in January, last year was the first year we did this. So this January, you're gonna see it being negligible, right? So we're accounting for all of the files we're attending to that deal with family issues, not just the typical domestic. So that's why that number is way up. So it's not a number to be scared of. It's actually down overall compared to previous years, which is good to see. Property crime is always great to see down. We did get down 7% this year, which is fabulous. Mischief to property tends to be a challenging one for us, especially through the summer months with the transient people in and out of town visiting. There's more alcohol on board. It just tends to create a bit more issues for us. General workload, you can see on the lower one there, down 5%. Priority 1 calls, unfortunately for us, are up. So those are the calls that require larger attendance by members generally. Mental health related stuff, this serious stuff, which also coincides with the top one where you can see an 18% increase in just common assaults and those types of files in general, an 11% or a 13% overall increase in persons crimes versus property crimes. Prisoners lodged, it was down for last year. This year we're hopping, so I expect that number to be up a bit this year. It's been quite the interesting beginning to this year. Charges forwarded, down slightly. That also coincides with we had fewer files. So just to make sense. Just the breakdown of the strengths so that citizens and the council recognizes, which they're already well aware of. 13% of our members are paid for through the provincial funding and stuff. Municipal members, 26 in total. That's a combination between Qualicum Beach and Parksville. So they make up roughly 66% of our strength at the detachment. Provincial calls for service, however, are 46%. So it is more than the 34% that they pay, but I'll explain more to that as we go. Municipal calls are about 54%, which is under what the 66% that you pay for in theory for 2024. Qualicum Beach specifically provides about 20% of our detachment strength. And then if you go down, you'll see the breakdown provincial business line. That's what PBL means. That's the total files for last year, Parksville, and then Qualicum Beach. So Qualicum Beach had made up 11% last year, which was up from, or 9% from 2023. You look at the numbers and they seem like, oh, okay, so the municipalities are technically carrying a bit more of their load, but administratively and stuff like this and being in the community far outweighs in Qualicum Beach and Parksville. We spend much more time in the community doing community events, doing beach days and all those types of things that we just don't do out in the rural areas. And that's just because you have an organized council both here in Parksville, and they bring us in on these individual stuff, and they just do more in their community. So we spend much more time in both of the communities that isn't represented just by a file. And then basically it's just some of the extra stuff that we do. We do a Christmas hamper program every year. We did 10 more families this year. We spent time, I don't have any specific pictures of stuff that we do in Qualicum Beach, but we were here for family, we were here for Halloween, we were here for the Christmas events, and, spend a lot of time. We do meet regularly with staff, so we just try to stay engaged and keep everybody up on what's going on so that we all know what's going on, and council is very forthcoming with us, as is staff, to let us know what their anticipated changes are going to be in the community so that we can plan well in advance, and we do the same for them. So it's just a great working relationship all in all. And I'll leave it to questions.
Thank you. Councillor Young.
I've always wondered, when it comes to speeding tickets, does money from the tickets go back to the municipality? And the reason why I'm asking that is we do have a resident area that is always speeding. And I'm wondering, because we have 8 members allotted for Qualicum Beach, could it be scheduled in that we have police officers doing speeding tickets in that area of our town?
There is a portion. Your finance department would be much better to ask for that, but there is a portion of violation tickets to the province that we write that do, in fact, return to the city. Am I correct on that? Correct. Yes, exactly. So a portion of that does come back, and we do work with. We're very fortunate to have Speed Watch through the community service group that works for our area. Speed Watch spends quite a bit of time in town. Staff members do send us emails. We get the Speed Watch stuff, so we kind of have a rough idea of, hey, can you please watch this area or watch that area? Obviously, responding to frontline calls is our bread and butter. That's what we have to be available for. But whenever allows, we certainly do set up this area or that area. We definitely focus the school zones before and after schools beginning, those types of things, so that we can kind of focus on areas that are brought to our attention. Definitely, we can focus on it.
So I'd like to ask, has Qualicum Woods been brought to your attention yet for resident speeding? Qualicum Woods? That area?
Yeah, it very well may have been. I'm not too sure, but an email can be sent from city staff to us too. Then they will send it, and we can kind of try to make an arrangement to have Speed Watch go out there and see. Because we'll generally send Speed Watch out, because more often than not, speeding's the end of the world on this particular road, and then we'll go set up and there's very few people, or it'll be one individual or something like that. So Speed Watch will go out ahead of us. They'll count cars basically and let us know, is it worth sending a member or 2 members out to do a focused enforcement in that area. We also all are very fortunate to also have BC Highway Patrol that works out of our office, completely independent, not paid for by the town. And I do include those in the monthly stats, and they write actually quite a few tickets in the Qualicum Beach area, Parksville area, and the rural area as well. So we kind of get the double bang out of that. And the fact that they leave from our detachment, they're having to drive marked cars through the communities to get to the highways.
Haven't caught me yet.
It's just a matter of time.
Also, the other question was, based on your files compared Qualicum Beach to Parksville, Parksville has much more files, more than 3 times, and yet I see that we pay for 8 members, whereas Parksville doesn't pay for more than 3 amount of the members.
Yeah, it all depends. It is a shared force, right? It's a hubbed area, so you do rely. The benefit to that is if there is issues that do take place in Qualicum Beach, those members will come here. They're not a dedicated force, so you don't have 8 members that work here, 18 members that work in Parksville, and 13 members that work in the rural area. They work all over the place. So you could have a Qualicum Beach funded member working in Bowser. You can have a provincial funded member running traffic right on Memorial Drive. So it's a shared resource. So it's a pool. So that's basically how it works. And then part of the way that you get the extra bang for that buck is stuff like this. And then we attend many more community functions. We're down on the beach. We do lots more things like that in town. So that more enhanced policing, which you benefit from more so than some of the rural areas, just because they're not quite as organized. Yeah.
I think Mr. Hare has a response to one of the questions.
Thank you, Your Worship. On the provincial traffic sharing revenue, I believe there's a formula at the province for distributing traffic revenue. I can come back to council, but I do not believe it's a direct function of the number of traffic violations issued within the community of Qualicum Beach. But I can look into that formula and come back at a future council meeting with that.
Thank you. Any other questions? Councillor Harrison.
So just 2 questions. One, actually, I just want to say also, too, just personally for you, thank you. I know there was one case that there was a VIMQ's presentation. There was one case in that presentation that you were personally responsible for where it was the worst case scenario for violence. And you caught the individual, I think within, was it an hour or 2, 2 hours, 3 hours, was it?
Yeah, it was good. It turned out quite well, all in all. Yeah, I can't talk a lot of shop and open.
Yeah, I know. And this is why I'm keeping it super vague, too, on my part. But
Very
just
dedicated.
those sorts of cases where the RCMP are actually doing a lot of work to keep us safe. So I just want to give appreciation for that firstly. And again, yeah, I respect that we can't talk out of shop too much. Are there any trends you're seeing in our area that we should be talking to our MLA or our MP about? Anything that you're seeing is starting to develop in Oceanside that, you know, further down the lines can be a bigger problem if we don't intervene now?
Offhand, actually, things have been pretty good. Last year was a pretty good year overall. We had a challenge in 2022 with the introduction of other institutions that came into town that brought in an element that was a bit more challenging for us. I think both councils and the RDN got on board with that quite quickly, and that's that relationship that we had. We talked earlier about that. That mended itself relatively well, and I think we're seeing the benefits of that with a reduction, that basic 5% reduction, and as well as the 5% reduction in property crime. I know, your citizens don't want their stuff broken into, right? So it's good to see that property crime go down, and I think a lot of that is attributed to fewer transient individuals in town or passing through town, and the members out at night flying that flag, driving around, being in your neighborhoods makes a big difference.
And just the one number that upset me was the assaults going up. Is there anything particular about that that is sort of like a trend? Or is it just, nothing we can do about it really directly?
It's not a trend. It's nothing we're seeing. It's when police respond, a file is scored how it comes in. So it can come in as something absolutely incredible, and we respond exactly like that. We get there, and it turns out it's nothing. The file is still scored as if it was that big deal that we initially attended, because that's how Stats Canada likes to see those files. So, and we're very fortunate here that we see these swings of 4 and 5% in some of our crimes that literally can be 2 or 3 calls more or less, right? So sometimes when we see, a 5% decrease in something, it's literally a call. So, yeah.
And just last thing, if I may, you mentioned essentially showing up in the morning and helping some folks move along a bit. Roughly how many individuals are you doing that on a consistent basis in town?
In Qualicum Beach, very few. Yeah, there's 2 or 3 that we talk to, in the TD Bank, for instance. People use those to try to get out of the cold once in a while. It's very, very few. Yeah.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments? Well, on behalf of all our residents, thank you for you and your department for keeping us safe.
Well, thank you very much for being so open and sharing with us, and it really helps us as well. So thank you guys very much.
Thank you.
Have a great one.
Correspondence. And this is kind of an illustration of when you want a letter to be discussed or taken action on, then ask to have it put on the correspondence, so we don't have to try and remember what was in the correspondence log, because there's so many. So when I see a letter that I think council should make a decision on, then I'll ask to have it put under correspondence, which is different than the log. So the first one is from Mr. Torcell with the request to make the pathway from Qualicum Beach Museum to Chronic Creek bicycle free. And so there's a staff comment. Any other direction from council? Councillor Skipsey?
Well, I guess my question is, does the staff comment preclude the notice of motion that I've made? Because I think it is worthy of a discussion at the Parks and Recreation Committee. And then I just had a question of staff. The trail is quite narrow in places, and I wondered, is there any kind of criteria or best practices for how wide a bicycle path or shared path should be? Because I think part of the concern is now with the electric bicycles, they move very quickly, and some of those areas, and happens to be where there's quite a steep embankment, and I just wondered if there's best practices as far as how wide that could or should be.
Mr. Sales.
Thank you, Mayor Westbrook. The first step in answering that question would need to be an assessment of the volume of users on the trail. It is a much lower volume than something like the Dolly Mount Trail, because the Dolly Mount Trail has a minimum 3-meter wide asphalt surface, which clearly wouldn't be the intention there. So you'd look at the need and the current user base. And then there would be some guidelines for some trail associations with regard to the specs, but the first step is just assessing the need. In answer to your first question, whether your notice of motion and the staff comment are mutually exclusive, the answer is no. So the Parks and Rec Commissions could certainly consider both the staff comment as well as your notice of motion. Thank you.
Well, I would like to move my notice of motion then, that the letter be referred to the Parks and Recreation Select Committee.
Thank you. I have a seconder, Councillor Young. A discussion, Councillor Harrison.
Oh, just one point too. The provincial government did release active transportation guide. I remember looking through it back in the day. I believe that was in 2018 or 2019, which is heavily prescribes for all sorts of different trail uses, what you want to do. Here's the width, here's the underlay, here's everything. So there is a provincial document which is very detailed. It's like 300 pages plus, if I recall correctly. It's very, very thick. I still agree with the staff comment at the end of the day, but I don't have a problem with the committee looking at it.
Yes, and I think this particular trail, and I use it often, it is narrow and some steep embankments, and there is a paved path on either side of it. So there's really, if you want to go on an electric bike or bicycle, there is other options that are actually better than competing with pedestrians and people with walking with dogs to go by there on an electric bicycle. So I think signage is good to start with. I agree with that, but also to refer to this to the Parks and Rec Committee. So we won't take any other action other than refer this to the Parks and Rec Committee, and then may come up with the same suggestion. So on that, that was moved, and is it seconded? Councillor Young seconded. Discussion. Councillor Vander.
I'm just wondering if the impetus for this was a safety concern or environmental concern.
I can't read somebody's mind, but I think there was all of them. Councillor Harrison.
The letter is on page 34 of our agenda, and it's pretty clearly a safety, in my view. I don't think it really talks about the environment at all in that, but it's pretty clear. Just one question I have, though, is that if this is going to the Environment Committee, I don't think we need to also forward the staff comment, because I think, quite frankly, that'll probably be included in that agenda for the committee. I don't think we need to do that, but I'm just checking.
No, the motion is pretty clear to refer this letter to the Parks and Rec Committee. And that's moved and seconded. Ms. Swenson, yes. So all the further discussion, all in favor, opposed, if any, carries. And then we have a second one that from Mrs. Brown about a fire hazard. And there's a staff recommendation, and I would move the staff recommendation. Councillor Young seconding. Discussion. All in favor? Opposed, if any? Carried. Thank you. I think that's it for correspondence. And then the amendment to our agenda regarding the Seacrest Place slope stabilization project. Who would like to start off with that? Mr. Miller?
Thank you, Your Worship. Staff will speak to this quite extensively, and we do have the staff report before you. The short story is we were hoping for a grant for this project. We have been advised that we weren't successful, but we do have a debrief scheduled with the province about that. In the interim, we really consider that we can't delay tendering because we lose the opportunity for contractors to still have their slots for projects available. So we anticipate every week we delay could result in a 10% increase in cost. We recommend that we proceed with this project in 2025 because of the potential risk that is also discussed in the report. And the Director of Finance and other members of staff have worked to make recommendations about reallocation of capital projects that could see this project achieved in 2025. So over to staff, or as you see fit, Your Worship.
Thank you. And I say the no from the province, I say is maybe. Mr. Watson.
Thank you, Your Worship. So the purpose of this project is to request early budget approval for what we're calling the Seacrest Place Slope Stabilization Project so that we can tender it next month. As this project represents a potential slope failure which could result in infrastructure and property damage. So Seacrest Place is located in the Eaglecrest subdivision off of Eaglecrest Drive. It's a dead-end road and it fronts down onto the waterfront where there are approximately 26 residential properties along the waterfront. There's only one way in and one way out of this road. It's a 14% grade going down the hill, and we are experiencing failure in about a 50 meter section of that roadway. Within that road prism are all the utilities, including water, storm, sewer, Fortis Gas, BC Hydro, TELUS, Rogers. It's the full meal deal. Fortunately, most of those utilities are close to the high side of the road. However, the sewer main, which is a 350 mil AC sewer main, does pass through the area that is failing. So if that slope were to slide down, it would either expose or cause a fracture in the AC sewer main, which collects approximately half of the Eaglecrest subdivision. So that wouldn't be a good thing for anybody downstream. Slope failures in this neighborhood have occurred. In fact, a house did slide off of its foundation a number of years ago. And about a year ago, we had a small slough on the high side of the road that caused about a dump truck load of material to land on Seacrest Place, where we had to do some cleanup there. In addition to that, if we didn't do a planned repair and there was a failure which caused, at least half or more of the road to fail and slough down to the lane below, it could be as long as 9 to 12 months to complete a repair. And the reason for that is it depends on, do we have funding to do the repair during that fiscal year, or would we have to wait? What type of weather are we experiencing? What type of weather would we be completing the repair in? Because when you complete these types of repairs during heavy rainfalls, it adds a whole lot of work to ensure all of your storm runoff is filtered and going into the ocean in a clean manner. As well as, there could be restricted access for emergency vehicles to get to to the residential properties below. And really the most important thing is at some point the oversteepened slope will be unable to support itself and will begin to slide. And when that happens, we won't be able to stop it. Unfortunately, staff don't know when that will happen. If you go to slide or figure 2, there, that one, you can see the deformation in the road that we are experiencing. That was just taken last month, and it's a little worse in person. It's hard to capture that in a good photo, but that is the image of what we currently see. The project itself would include a an MSC, a mechanically stabilized earth retaining wall along the lane below, supporting that downhill lane. That'd be about a 60-meter long, 5-meter tall, mechanically stabilized earth retaining wall. The wall itself would be anchored into the downhill lane, so for the purpose of the construction, we would need to excavate that downhill lane down to the lower lane below so that we can roll the geogrid underneath that laneway there and build the wall back out. So when we do the construction, it would be unlikely that we'll be able to maintain 2-lane traffic. So there will be some traffic impacts that we're working through right now, but we'd like to ensure that we maintain at least 1-lane traffic throughout the duration of the project. Furthermore, we'll replace the poor road base. We will replace the 100 millimeter diameter AC water main with a 6-inch PVC water main from the top to the bottom of the hill for about 200 meters. We will replace the storm system to intercept more groundwater and prevent further deterioration of the road base for the future. And we will place some guardrails. You can see it, well, you can't really see it, but under the ivy on the edge of the road there is an asphalt curb. So we'll improve the safety there by adding some guardrails. And we'll replace the pavement from top to bottom. So as Ms. Varela mentioned, early budget approval is important so that we can get the best competitive prices. And furthermore, the longer we wait, the higher the risk of someone or a contractor having to complete this work over the course of some fall months when there could be lots of rain, making things more difficult. Not to mention the impact on the residential properties below. Financial-wise, this project is expected to cost about $2.581 million. That includes the water main replacement as well. We had, as you've heard, we did apply for grant funding, but unfortunately we were unsuccessful in receiving that. However, we would still like to move forward and reprioritize some existing projects to cover the cost of this project in this fiscal year. So as far as the recommendations go, the council authorized early budget approval for the Seacrest slope stabilization project in the amount of $2.581 million, and further that council instructs staff to reprioritize capital projects included in the 25 to 29 capital program, such that Seacrest Place project is fully funded in 2025, and further that council instructs staff to amend the financial plan by reprioritizing capital projects in the 5-year capital plan prior to third reading. Thank you.
Thank you. Before we go into the recommendation, any questions about the project? All right, Councillor Skipsey.
Thank you. And I know this road has been in rough shape for a while because I remember on my first term on council, and Councillor Avis and I used to debate what was worse, Bay Street or Seacrest. And it's great that Bay Street's been addressed and now that this is coming forward. Is there anything that will be done around the stabilization of the upslope area? Because I know that's been a concern.
Mr. Watson.
Yeah, through the chair. The plan is at this, this project doesn't include anything for repairs on the uphill side of the project. However, we are planning to shift the road over on the low side so that we do have some more breathing room for future options to do something on the high side. Because right now it's so steep, it's almost vertical.
All right, Councillor Harrison.
And yeah, my parents live, like Mr. Avis does, not too far away from this property. So I remember walking the family dog, and you can actually feel on that edge how much it drops down. It's a good, even like 4 or 5 years ago, it was a good, like almost like half a foot of drop. It's really quite significant. And obviously 40% of sewage for probably a good 800, 900 homes, I'd assume. We really don't want that failure going right out into those waterfront properties and into the water. So this is something that is a need to have. Are there any potential funding programs that, like, I know usually when the project is done, you can't retroactively get a grant. But I know once or twice, while we didn't expect an opportunity, that we applied for something that sort of came up in the middle of things. Would there be opportunities over the course of the year, like when we put this out to tender, someone submits a bid, would there be opportunities maybe in that timeline?
You know, that's a very sensitive point for me because, and some of the people here probably remember when Town of Qualicum Beach took in Eaglecrest. And this road was built when it was part of the regional district of the NIMO. And as you know, it was the province who would have approved this project. And that's why I thought we've had some changes in provincial government, and perhaps they don't know the history of this, and perhaps if we share that history with them, they may be more likely to support it, because they were part of the decision to do it the way they did, which was, I don't think, was the correct way. But anyway, so we'll follow up some more. But at this point, we need staff to proceed with the tender because things are stacking up for the construction industry. And if we're coming in late, it will be costing more and perhaps not get it done. And we don't want to delay that either. So I think we should proceed with this, but then take a step back and say, what else can we do to get more funding for this project? And I would think there's a couple of options that we could exercise, but I don't want to discuss that here right now. But we will not give up on trying to get somebody else to help pay for this because it wasn't the town who designed this road. Thank you. So with that, there's the three recommendations. We didn't have the recommendation on the floor yet. Councillor Harrison and Councillor Skipsey. Discussion on these recommendations, and we'll take them all three at once. All in favor? Opposed, if any? Carried. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Watson. Yes, Ms. Varela.
I think it's just important for the public and council to know as well that if we scroll to the inform piece of the staff report, based on council's decision making here today, we'll ensure each of those affected 26 properties get a copy of the staff report, a copy of the construction notice, and then they'll also know Mr. Watson is point for the project. So again, I think it's that over and above service level that the town provides, and we will be continuing that with this one, just as we did for Beach Creek.
Thank you. And since we have some senior representatives of the Eaglecrest Resident Association, it will probably show up in your next Eagle Eye as well. Thank you. Next item is the financial plan. Mr. Hare.
Thank you, Your Worship. Information regarding the budget pressures and details that have been included in the proposed financial plan have been presented to council and the public at numerous meetings spanning from October to early January. We do have a brief PowerPoint presentation to recap the contents of the report in the agenda that supports the 5-year financial, thank you, Danielle, that supports the 5-year financial plan bylaw, the property tax impacts of the proposed bylaw, and provides highlights of what's included in the operating budget and the capital budget for 2025-2029. So that being said, Council did provide staff with clear direction on December 11th that the 2025 to 2029 financial plan bylaw be prepared, incorporating a targeted maximum increase of 6.6% from the previous year. Staff at that time had recommended a budget with a tax increase implication of 9.6% to address the financial pressures and resource requirements of 2025. The reduction to 6.6% was achieved by a reduction in the contribution to the strategic initiative reserves of $125,000 for 2025, and that contribution will be reinstated back to its original level in 2026. The term bylaw compliance position, which was proposed to be funded from taxation, is now funded from accumulated surplus. And then further increases in revenue from non-taxation revenue sources, such as construction revenue coming in slightly higher than originally anticipated, opportunities for recovery of revenue from electric vehicle charging stations, which will be the subject of a report coming forward to council in Q1 or Q2 of this year, being taken into consideration, an increase in some interest revenue that is not allocated to reserves, and also there's the opportunity for a minor increase in the 1% in tax of lieu of revenue from utilities, primarily from Fortis, which was budgeted conservatively and adjusted to reflect past experience. All of these sources of revenues are quite minor, but when you bring them together, there's enough revenue there to fund the 0.8 FTE for new services that was proposed previously in previous meetings. In terms of what the 6.6% increase addresses in the budget, the operating budget addresses workforce planning costs, which are comprised of contractual obligations for staff and council remuneration, paid on call firefighter benefits provisions, additional staffing resources, which are comprised of the 1.2 FTE in parks to address the capacity shortage to meet current service requirements, the 0.8 FTE that I just spoke about, which addresses the new or revised service levels that are driven through council approval of new projects or initiatives. The Fire Smart and Wildfire Resiliency position, which also provides support in fire operations. That position is partially funded through grant funding for the Fire Smart and Wildfire components of that position, and seasonal support for GIS data services. It also addresses the RCMP contract increase provision and provides for an increase in the contribution to the asset replacement reserve equivalent to 1.3% of the previous year's tax levy. In terms of the impact on property taxes, the financial plan bylaw, the proposed financial plan bylaw will result in a 6.6% increase in property tax revenue collected from existing taxpayers in comparison to 2024, which will generate additional property taxes of $804,000. The impact to the average homeowner of a property assessed at the 2025 average of $981,000 would be an increase in municipal property taxes of about $13 a month or $152 per year. The impact on individual homes will of course vary from the average depending on the assessed value of a property and how the change in assessed value deviates from the average assessment change for 2025. And just as a reminder, a 1% tax increase in Qualicum Beach generates an additional revenue just over $122,000. The town also provides water, sewer, and contracted garbage and recycling services to residents, and the cost of these services is funded through user rates and parcel taxes. So parcel taxes in water and sewer will increase by $20 and $5 respectively as per the water and sewer bylaw. And additional revenue generated through these increases will be contributed to the water and sewer infrastructure reserves, so it will not be used for operating costs. Solid waste and recycling services are also projected to increase by about $5 per household in comparison to 2024. So the impact to the average home of the combined municipal property taxes and utilities is an increase of about $182 from the previous year. For the previous year, the average was about $3,400, and this represents an overall average increase of about 5.7% from the previous year to the average assessed property. So in terms of the capital program currently includes $12.8 million for replacement of existing infrastructure and investment in new assets or upgrading and expansion to the value of $2.5 million. The four projects listed here, namely the Seacrest slope stabilization and road reconstruction, which was a subject of the report that Mr. Watson just spoke to, the skate park project and the two airport projects, which are grant dependent, do represent 2/3 of the $12.8 million budget here, which is just over $8 million. The budget for upgrading and expansion projects is primarily represented by the bus garage site project and carry forward of the 2024 works for the Highway 19 ditch infill, bike lane and parking project. Full details of all projects are included in the financial plan document that was attached to the to the council report. So in terms of the Seacrest slope stabilization project, this information is, we just recently found out that the grant application was denied, but we've gone through the financial plan, and financial plan currently that you have in front of you is based on 2.3 million of the Seacrest slope stabilization project being funded through the anticipated grant. And as was reported, that grant was denied. So given the priority to move forward with this project, staff has identified reprioritizing existing proposed capital projects reflected in the draft financial plan and reallocating funding sources for currently proposed capital projects to enable this project to be fully funded in the 2025 financial year. So what staff will be proposing is that the airport generator project and the Balsam storm system project, which were funded through the Community Works Fund, be deferred beyond the scope of the 5-year financial plan. And also a number of other projects, funding for other projects be reallocated to create room for this project. So with these changes, the $2.6 million anticipated cost for this project would be fully funded through the funding sources identified. These changes will be reflected in the final version of the financial plan, which comes forward to council in February. And we would also make an amendment to the bylaw prior to third reading to reflect these changes. So actually, in terms of looking at the funding sources themselves, I've listed the funding sources just for council information that would fund this project. So we would fund this project to the extent of $1.4 million from the Community Works funding. That's the reserve that was also, that used to be referred to as the gas tax fund. The Community Growth Fund, based on the interest that reserve owned, will have $700,000 available for dedication to this project. And we believe that 231 is eligible for funding through development cost charges, and the water and sewer infrastructure components of the project will be funded from the water and sewer reserves. The draft financial plan that is attached to the staff report does contain information to a great level of detail with the intent of this plan to be to provide transparency and a clear and better understanding of the town's budget. The budget book it's also referred to as the budget book, and the budget book is draft at this point, and the content is changing with council direction and new information. It still requires grammatical and punctual formatting adjustments, which will be reflected in the final version. And Your Worship, the proposed financial plan bylaw has been prepared to reflect council direction that was provided on December 11th, and staff recommend that council approve first and second readings of the bylaw today.
Thank you. And as you indicated, it is a draft, and yesterday we received an extensive email with a number of comments, and our financial administrator will check those comments and report back at third reading if any amendments are required. Thank you. So there's a motion to make the changes. So we'll have the staff recommendation on the number 1. This is on the top of your agenda package of page 4, and it's on the screen. So could have a motion to that effect. Councillor Skipsey, Councillor Vander, discussion. All in favor? Opposed, if any? Carried. And then for first reading, who would like to make the motion to introduce it for first reading? Councillor Young, Councillor Vander, discussion. Councillor Harrison.
Yeah, I'm just looking at page 132, where we're looking at the facilities budget, particularly with the information about Seacrest, but also too, I was going to do this even if we had got the grant for Seacrest, honestly. But I think the two main projects that are in upgrading and expansion, which is essentially the bus garage site and the Satlam Park projects, I'd like to see both those move to 2027, pushed out 2 years. So I'll just make a motion to that effect as an amendment. If people support it, great. If not, that's fine.
Okay.
Of our total package, sorry, it's page 179 in red ink and 132 on the bottom, and it's confusing, and I'm confused too. You're right. Good question. Sorry. And the reason just being that those are things which are, in my view, sort of nice to haves, not necessarily need to haves. But just making a motion that both of those get pushed back to 2027. If there's no seconder, we carry on with first reading.
Councillor Young, sorry. Ms. Varela.
Just so staff are keeping up, could we have the page number that is being referred to? Thank you, Your Worship.
Sorry, in black ink 132, in red ink 179. So I think it's page 179 of our package and 132 of the financial plan. Sorry, I got confused there because it is really confusing. Sorry, it has the title facilities on it, and it's, yeah. So it's the upgrading and expansion section for projects. And in that section, which is the third one, there's two projects which basically start in 2025, Satlam Park and the bus garage, and just pushing those back 2 years.
All right. So I just want to make sure that staff has the motion. Okay, and it's been seconded. Discussion. Councillor Skipsey.
Well, I won't be voting in support for that because at Satlam Park, they're starting construction on the lodge, which would contain the washrooms. And I think that if we don't do it now, we've missed an opportunity. We would probably have to buy or build a separate washroom facility at a much higher cost. So I wouldn't support pushing that out. For the washroom part for 2025, I think that amount, if it's the 350, that is, I believe, for more enhancements to the park, then I could perhaps consider pushing that out, but that wouldn't affect 2025 anyway, so that could be a further discussion.
The mention about other things than the washroom, I didn't quite understand where you were going with that. Can you articulate that, please?
Well, my understanding is that the 250 for this year would be to go towards the accessible washrooms in the park. My understanding was not that the whole 350,000 next year would be. So I just wanted to clarify that the 250 that's in the budget for this year is actually to go towards the washrooms and not other aspects of park enhancement.
Thank you. Mr. Sales, can you clarify the discussion here?
Yes, thank you, Mayor Westbrook. The majority of the $250,000 allocated in this year's budget is going towards the washrooms as a part of the lodge. There is a smaller component that would go towards servicing costs, for example, and the development of a sign, which is under discussion with Qualicum First Nation. So a minor component goes to other park features. Sure.
Yes, I agree that we have committed to the washrooms in Satlam Park that are affiliated with the lodge, and I don't see any reason to not fund that, and it definitely needs to be funded at this time because they have started on their renovations and are pretty much going full tilt. Hoping to be going full tilt. We had Sal Hacks, St. Andrew's Lodge, Historical and Cultural Society had their AGM on Monday, which I attended, and they outlined the whole construction process, and they are going, and I think it would be remiss of us to say, well, now we've changed our mind and you're not going to get a washroom. So I think that would be very unfair and illogical at this point. The $350,000 in 2026, I think that we have taken considerable time to work on the design of the park proper. And I don't really see any reason why we wouldn't go ahead with that in 2026 as well.
Thank you. Councillor Young.
In regards to Satlam Park, is there a possibility of including or asking for Indigenous grants that could be applicable for this?
Mr. Sales, do you know anything about that?
Thank you, Mayor Westbrook. So if you're referring to grants that wouldn't be, that municipalities would not be eligible for because we can only apply for municipal grants. So I'm not sure if there's First Nations-oriented funding sources that could be tapped into. They wouldn't be on our radar, so to speak.
Thank you. Councillor Young. And then Mr. Svensson. Go ahead. I'll maybe let Svensson go ahead because there may be an issue with the motion itself. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mayor Westbrook. I didn't get a seconder for the motion, so just as we're debating. Did you? Okay, thank you.
Yeah, just a couple of things. One is that I did my own due diligence on what are local government costs for washrooms. And there was a report that was commissioned by McMaster University a couple years ago. Now, granted, it's a couple years ago. It's a bit dated. And it ranges from about 40,000 to $1 million. $1 million is a giant stainless steel behemoth that self-cleans, is operating 24 hours a day. Obviously not what we need. But the low one was the City of Montreal in 2015, which was $40,000. And I think on the low end is more what we'd be looking at for that site if we're going to be doing a separate one. The other issue for me is that on the 2022 election, we did have the ballot question, quote, should the town spend the necessary funds up to a maximum of $700,000 to refurbish the St. Andrew's Lodge building? And throughout the election, the rhetoric was, we don't need a penny of town money, we're fine, we're not asking for anything. And now there's money being allocated 2 years later. So I just want to point that out, that I don't know if that necessarily forms a binding referendum question or not, but I think we might want to think about that for a moment too. But for me, I have no problem lending the money and then they pay it back over a long period of time. They've done a ton of work. They've done much more work than I initially expected. So I do want to give them full credit for coming this far. But at the same time, we did have A, a ballot question, and B, I think those costs, we were looking at the cost to refurbish a washroom in town and then make it up to contemporary code to make it more accessible, which led to a huge escalation in costs. Whereas if we had something that was purpose-built, it might be a lot less expensive than what we're looking at. And I don't know if we've done our due diligence on that. I know the brief example that I looked at, you could have saved a lot of money.
Councillor Young.
Also in that same category, I know the visitor center has their washroom, public washroom, is grant dependent. So I would like to see if we can entertain looking for some Indigenous grants and not have this amount charged right now this year.
Thank you. So the motion is to slide it over to 26, that's 27. That's the motion. Further discussion on that motion. Go ahead.
And just the reason 2027 is 2026 is going to be updating our collective bargaining agreement. And I'm going to assume the union is going to want essentially caught up for the huge spike in inflation we had a couple of years ago.
Thank you. I will be voting against that motion. I think it should be happening this year, outlined by the organization. Excuse me. And as Councillor Skipsey and Councillor Vander Valk indicated at the meeting on Monday, they are going ahead with the improvements. I think they got a grant for $200,000, which is now basically the town's. This is a town-owned building. So for them to get us a grant of $200,000 to make sure the building is safe, they also need washrooms, and the public washrooms. Because of the public washrooms, I think the public will contribute to paying those, and the time to do it is now while they're under construction. So I will not be supporting that motion. Further discussion. All in favor? All in favor of the motion, meaning to slide it over? On the amendment. All right? All in favor? Opposed? Motion fails. So that's one. The motion is to proceed with first reading. Any other amendments? Then motion on first reading. All in favor? Opposed? Councillor Harrison opposed. For second reading. Could I have a motion for second reading? Councillor Vander Valk, Councillor Skipsey, pardon me. Discussion? All in favor? Opposed, if any, carried. And as I said, we did receive a very extensive and detailed email yesterday afternoon. And I got to say, I commend the people that read our budget plan carefully and are very articulate in what area we could make some changes or clarifications. So we appreciate that, but it's going to take some time for our French administrator to look at all that and report back to us before third reading. Councillor Harrison.
Sorry, just move through those votes very fast. I had one more question just for staff briefly on the financial plan, if that's all right.
Go ahead.
Thank you very much, Your Worship. Thanks for bending the rules. So just the question was, the one key thing in that email we got was what they viewed might be a discrepancy between the presentation with Mr. Murray, where he said this is our annual amount for infrastructure that we need to spend, and then the budget amount for the tax increase for infrastructure. Now, is it because the tax increase is additional to what we were already spending, or is there a gap with how much we need to spend on infrastructure relative to that presentation? Or maybe that's for a future meeting, we can follow up on that.
Sorry, would you like to respond now or later?
I can respond to that now, Your Worship.
Go ahead.
So the increase in the contribution to reserves is in line with the asset management presentation that Mr. Murray had made. So he had basically to address that gap over a period of 15 to 20 years, presently a 1.3% of the previous year tax levy increase is required, which amounted this year to about $160,000.
Voted for. And so the next item are the committee and liaison reports. One thing I just wanted to bring up, because a lot of folks in Qualicum Beach are very concerned about the clear cutting that took place in Columbia Beach on Viking Way. And of course, it's in the regional district. One of the questions was, did they get an archaeological permit? Yes, they did. Did they follow the rules based on provincial legislation? Yes, they did. So every letter I received, I forwarded to the RDN staff, who then promptly responded to all the concerns. But I thought I'd just make the point here that Columbia Beach is not in town, but sometimes people don't know exactly where Qualicum Beach ends, so I get all these letters. And I explained to them that this is not in Qualicum Beach. However, I can attest that the rules were followed. But it also shows me, and I stand to be corrected, that when we have a tree bylaw, which they don't have, but if they had a tree bylaw in those areas, this clear cut would have had to go through a process. And there might have been fewer trees cut because to save the heron colony and some other reasons. So it's kind of clear to me that a tree bylaw to stop clear cutting from areas that otherwise would be protected is a good reason to have a tree bylaw. I don't necessarily agree that we control every tree on everybody's private property that once it's been developed. But certainly in this case, and there were some others where I saw some clear cutting that I thought a tree bylaw to prevent that kind of thing in Qualicum Beach would be good to have. So with that, Councillor Harrison.
Thank you very much, Your Worship. So there's a few things in the past little while. One was Councillor Skipsey did include in her report a discussion of the public open house. The one thing I just wanted to highlight is that the folks who were there from the Save the Commons group would really appreciate the opportunity to have a sit-down meeting, whether it's in camera or in public, as soon as possible. They have a lot of questions still. I know staff have done some outreach, but even so, as of the date of that public open house, they had a lot of questions and a lot of concerns. Hopefully, if we sit down together, it seemed like they wanted to work things out. So that would be, I think, best for all parties. So I don't know when we have time, but just in the future, if we could, that'd be a great thing to do. Sorry, I think Ms. Varela has her hand up.
Ms. Varela.
Your Worship, I would like to discuss this further because if the Save the Commons group were to enter in, hypothetically, into a procurement process down the road, I just want to make sure where the edges are. So maybe I could take that offline, discuss it with the mayor, discuss it with the group, because we wouldn't want to preclude them if there was some sort of procurement process down the road or service provision discussion. It's just a very broad scope that the group is talking about. So I want to protect them in any conversations going forward. So if we could just take a lens to that and maybe have a discussion with the group. I know staff has been interfacing, so we'll continue with that. Thank you, Your Worship.
Yeah, I agree. I saw all the correspondence and I've heard the comments. And I think it's important for the town of Qualicum Beach to be open to work with a nonprofit group to see if we can make things better for everybody. Thank you.
And I think from the brief conversation I had with some members, because it went on for a while, it did seem like the interests align. It did seem like everyone, at the end of the day, wants to get at the same place. It's just a question of how we get there. And then I had one question from a citizen just on the phone about egress from the town in the event of a wildfire. So this loops into emergency management. And I know we have emergency management plans. Would there be any way for the public to look at some of those plans, or is this something where they're better served as using the inquiry system? Just through the chair to staff, I'm not sure who's the best. Maybe Mr. Sales?
And go up, Mr. Sales, go for it.
Yes, thank you. Through the chair to Councillor Harrison. The regional district in Nanaimo has taken the lead on an evacuation study, so that is being done in collaboration with the City of Parksville, Town of Qualicum Beach, and the regional district, looking at evacuation routes from a number of different areas. And the town supported that grant application, and they were successful, so that project is underway.
So I'll just let them know that, we're underway in this process, and then we'll have that updated. In the interim, is there sort of like a informal understanding? I mean, there's a finite number of options here. We don't have an endless number of different routes to go, but I'm just wondering, in the immediate term, is there any sort of feedback I should give beyond the grant process you referred to?
Thank you. Through the chair to Councillor Harrison, I would suggest that the resident could contact town staff directly, and our emergency program coordinator could respond. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Sales. Also, I did a brief building tour on Monday, I believe. Sorry, I'm a bit sleep deprived, so the days are blending, of East Village and the affordable housing building on Railway. The interesting thing for the East Village project is that, according to the proponents, everyone who's moved in there is local. They're almost completely full. There's a couple of units left. The other thing that was very interesting talking to them is that they had about 100 people initially say, I look at the demographics. This is going to come into something I'm actually going to show in a second if Danielle has the slides. But there's a lot of single seniors in Qualicum Beach, disproportionately women. And what was interesting is they were saying that the overwhelming majority want to have a 2-bedroom unit, not a 1-bedroom unit, which I found very interesting because I thought they would have gone for a 1-bedroom in some cases, but in their words, and it reminds me of a conversation I had with someone who was getting one of my COVID shots, they want 1 bedroom for themselves and then a bedroom if someone from their family drops by. And just there are 3 slides. It does relate to the housing study, but it's just, so page, the 3rd one first. So this is Qualicum Beach's total population. So what I did is I just compiled census data. This goes back to '86. And I broke it into 15-year bands for a few reasons. One of which is that the final age in every census changes every 10 years. So this is the only way to make it work for every single one that's consistent. But what you can see is that our population for everyone under the age of 60 basically peaked in 2006 and has actually been in decline. For folks under the age of 45, it peaked in 1996 and has been in decline since then. This is going to loop into the housing needs report in terms of the type of units that are needed. Where we're actually seeing population growth in our overall population is in folks who are younger retirees and older seniors. Both those groups are going very, very quickly. I would also note, too, it was the middle of the pandemic, so caveat emptor, but in the last census, we saw a slight growth in young kids and young parents. I'm not sure if that'll be sustained, but if it is sustained, that would be lovely. And just go back to number 2. So this is a weird thing where basically you take each share as a percent, and you can see how heavily in the past since 1986, how heavily our demographics have been shifting down. So a lot of the middle-aged people are in decline, and you have more and more seniors, which means more and more services. And the last one is the very last page, the very last slide. And that is the population for all of Oceanside. Parksville, Qualicum Beach, only goes to 2001. Prior to that, it was RDN North, and the boundaries aren't quite the same as the alphabet soup of EFGH. But if you wanted to, you could probably, it's really close to being the same. And again, you see that same sort of pattern where regionally, that under 60 population peaked in 2006. Again, we're seeing some growth in young families in the last 5 years, which is good to see. But the growth of the older population is accelerating much more rapidly than young folks. And the reason, again, this loops into it, it's going to loop into the discussion of what type of units our town needs to build as part of the provincially mandated update to our OCP. So when we get our housing need reports, we have to zone our town to meet the projections in those housing need reports. And that'll be part of the conversation when we get to that. But I just want to, this is actually too, if you want this, just send me an email. I've got a bunch of census data compiled on my computer that I do for fun because I need better hobbies. And this is something I'm happy to share with people. Also so they can check the data themselves if they're not sure about it. But those are, for me, I think it's a really important consideration to look at where our population's at. I'll also say, just as one last aside, usually people think of Area F as where all the young families go. And when I compiled the data for Area F, I was really surprised how rapidly it's aging. It's still the youngest part of our area, but it is aging very rapidly as well. So it's a trend in every community. We're increasing the least in terms of median age. Parksville has increased the most in terms of median age in the last 15 years in the census. No, so it's 20. And the new census will be in about a year and a half. So we'll get an update then. It'll be very interesting. And anything else? Over the past while, I've got some business cards of folks. So I think with some of the stuff happening in the world, there's some emails I'll send out to staff, not to people who are far more important than me, but to the staff who work for them, and try to help on things like tariff response and some ideas about how to get efficiencies with affordable housing, looping into the building with the discussion of the railway project. I also spoke to some people who have experience building homes for BC Housing and the process, and get some feedback on where there may be some inefficiencies. Maybe there's some things in terms of how the province does things where BC could save money, and then that could actually result in more units being built. So I really appreciate their feedback on that. It's really good to get some unalloyed feedback on strengths and weaknesses. Beyond that, I should probably let that go. Oh, I just had one last question, sorry, if I may. Just through the chair to Mr. Sales. So we had the temporary cold weather shelter open in the evenings for 3 days. And I remember seeing in the email there was a discussion of the RDN bus schedule. Like there was busing that was provided through the RDN. My just question was, what were the times that the bus was showing up, and where did the bus go?
Thank you, Mayor Westbrook. So, as you noted, there was an emergency warming center opened up at the Christian Fellowship Center on Village Way. That site has regular scheduled bus service for every day except for Sunday. So staff and the emergency program made arrangements with the regional district to ensure that there was a bus that would arrive there at the closure of the facility in the morning. So it was just intended to connect to the regular bus service. So that person may have been returning to another place like Parksville, or who knows where they go. It just connected them to the service. Thank you.
Okay, so just the reason I raised is that last year when we did that, the bus basically went to one stop in Parksville, I believe, and then went to the Woodgrove Center. And then there was no other service at the Woodgrove Center for another half hour. So it was something where I understand there were timelines last year because of daycare that had already been book time, and so they had to leave a little bit earlier in the day, I believe, if I recall correctly, last year. I'm trying to remember. But just as we're doing these responses, it's good to make sure that, we've got everything checked off on our side, but when we're working with the RDN to make sure that the bus service doesn't leave people essentially stranded at Woodgrove for half an hour waiting for the first morning bus in Nanaimo, that wouldn't be great. But I do appreciate the fact that we got that going and the leadership at the Fellowship Center to allow that to happen. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Harrison. Councillor Skipsey.
Thank you. I did do a report this time, but a few things have happened since then. On January the 13th, I did attend the Mabry meeting on the OECMs, and I learned that there may be some funding for restoration work available in the areas that we're considering for OECMs or protected areas, but it's only in the short term. So just put that out there. Also on January the 15th, I attended the golf course monthly board meeting, and also a Mabry workshop. And there's research They have funding to do research around perceptions around climate change and the difference between the science and the actions and whatnot. So it was a very interesting group discussion, but if anyone's interested in participating in that research, have thoughts they'd like to share, then you could reach out to Mabry, Courtney at Mabry. On January 20th was our first beach day. It seems a little chilly to be thinking about beach day, but, and I also attended the AGM for the St. Andrew's Lodge. I do want to do a shameless plug for our second repair cafe, which is happening this Saturday, January 25th, in the hall at St. Stephen's United Church from 10 a.m. to 1 p.m. And there is more information on the website repaircafeoceanside.ca. And I think it's a great way of keeping things out of the landfill, and it's all done by volunteers. So, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Skipsey, and thank you for taking reporting to a whole new level. Really appreciate that. Thank you, Councillor Vander.
Thank you, and I too have my written report. I did want to just point out, because people might think it's a bit odd to be reporting way back in December, and I'm only reporting until January 13th, simply so that I can get the report in according to schedule. So I don't really have anything to add at this point, other than the fact, as I mentioned before, that I did attend the annual general meeting of St. Andrew's Lodge Historical and Cultural Society, and they had two very interesting, I found them very interesting speakers. Not only the fellow that's helping a great deal with the actual construction, but also there was a presentation about the architecture of Sam Little, and that was a very interesting presentation as well, and sort of reinforces the idea that we need to value our historic background and buildings, and I think that this makes a big contribution to doing that. So that's it for me.
Thank you. And that is the correct approach. If you do things after the deadline to submit your reports, to put it on for the next council meeting, if you want it on record, it's always good to keep a record. So that's entirely appropriate, and I thank you for that consideration. Councillor Young.
I just wanted to acknowledge that we're beginning of the year, and so Happy New Year. Also, that tax season is coming up, and our town has a lot of nonprofit societies, many of them that I will mention about. For those that can, you're going to be paying taxes. Please consider donating to some of the nonprofit societies in our community, because this is to support the services they offer in our community. One of them, in Councillor Skipsey's report, she mentioned the 100 Women Who Cares. I also want to mention there's also the 100 Oceanside Men and also 100 Kids for Change. These are all groups open to the public to join, meeting 4 times a year, to choose a nonprofit organization to donate financial support. So check their websites on how to join. Also, since the deadline to submit charitable donations for tax returns has been extended to February 28, feel free to conveniently donate to Tosh, our local art gallery. Every contribution, big or small, goes a long way to supporting the multitude of exhibits and classes offered. So see their website also. Also, more recently, there was a joint release by our town and the city of Parksville regarding healthcare, and so a huge thanks to Island Health and Division of Family Practice in securing 8 doctors and NPs for the Oceanside area last year. As a liaison to Flowerstone Clinic, I just want to mention they currently have 3,740 attached patients, and currently they have 2 nurse practitioner students who graduate end of June. They hope to be able to secure them as well. Also save the date, last Sunday of May is Qualicum Beach Annual Family Day celebration. Check your website Check their website to sign up to participate in the parade or on the stage or as an exhibit booth or as a food truck vendor. And most importantly, bring your family and friends to this always fun-filled day, and that is the last Sunday of May. Last week at the Qualicum Beach Museum board meeting, I had the opportunity to tour the archive buildings with a very impressive online database of the history of Qualicum Beach. So if you have any historical Qualicum Beach memorabilia or doing some Qualicum Beach historical research, this is the place to go to, and they have it. And also want to thank David Hallam for all his hard work in the archives, as well as a wonderful volunteer museum board that presented to us last council meeting. We are very fortunate to have this high caliber of expertise. For example, their volunteer secretary, Jess, has a PhD in anthropology and teaches at VIU. Their employee, Kazal, has a bachelor in archaeology and First Nation studies. And their executive director, Lorraine, has a PhD in adult education and museum studies. So we are very fortunate to have services like the Qualicum Beach Museum. And also, they also can give tax receipts for donations. And I also want to mention this museum has learning Saturdays 1 to 4 p.m. for kids of all ages. There's fun activities with a new theme every month. Also then, coming up, Mindless in May is in its third year in Qualicum Beach. This is organized by Diane Moran, and she has open call to youth for submissions on the theme, Have Your Say. The deadline is April the 4th. This is an event that has been sponsored by our local Qualicum Beach Rotary, and this year it will be exhibited in our Qualicum Beach Town Library. And hopefully our town can offer a nominal amount for a prize for the one of the award winners. Community in Bloom's international theme this year is Edible Gardens, a powerful way to encourage sustainability and support local ecosystems when food security has been a growing concern. Mark it on your calendar, February the 11th, 7:30 p.m., Qualicum Beach Garden Club at the Civic Center presents. Growing food isn't just about growing it from the soil. Are you ready to grow up? Don Giberson of Van Isle Vertical Farms will be doing a presentation of vertical growing. And it's so really important that we have a continuous supply of fresh produce with the rising cost of living. And finally, and as you know, we're experiencing some cold weather again, a further hardship for those experiencing hard and difficult times. Please be compassionate and generous. Participate in walking the annual coldest night of the year. Is a fundraiser Saturday, May 22nd, or pledge your donation online to support me in doing this walk for the St. Stephen Stompers to support Island Crisis Care Society.
You sure the coldest night is on May 22nd? I think it was February.
Oh, February, sorry, yeah. February 22nd.
Okay, thank you for your report. Because we're going to be lining up some consultants via Zoom, we need a break. So I'm not sure whether it's 5 minutes or a little bit more. 5 will do? Okay, so a motion to have a 5-minute recess. Councillor Skipsey, Councillor Vander, all in favor? We have a recess. Thank you.
Hey, this is Jason, IT from Qualicum Beach. I'm just wondering if we could do a sound check with all of you. If you could just do audio right now for me. Steve, could you just talk again, Steve?
Yeah. Hey, Jason. Steve here from Intertech Fleet Strategies.
I'm Petronella. Nice to meet you.
on your agenda, which is the winter holiday town hall closure. Perhaps Ms. Swenson could introduce this.
Thank you, Mayor Westbrook. So the staff report's contained on page 198 of your agenda, and staff are recommending that council approve a closure of town hall office during the 2025 holiday season for 3 business days, as we did this past year. So December 22nd, 23rd, and 24th during the period through the 22nd to the 26th, and it just gives staff the opportunity to use their annual vacation time to have that break.
Thank you. Councillor Harrison?
Just moving the staff recommendation.
Yes, thank you. Councillor Skipsey seconding. Any further discussion? All in favor? Opposed? If any? Carried. Thank you.
And Mayor Westbrook, sorry.
Yes.
May I just have one moment to also introduce our newest staff member, Nathan Syracuse. He's our Corporate Services Coordinator, and we're very happy to welcome him to the Corporate Services team and look forward to his contributions to provide service to council and the public.
So welcome, Nathan, but you have to move that name tag over and we'll get you a new one.
We've got one ordered.
Okay, good. Thank you, Ms. Swenson. So I think it's time now to introduce us to the consultants, and I'll turn it over to Mr. Sales.
Thank you, Mayor Westbrook. The next item on the agenda today is a presentation of the Interim Housing Needs Report. This report was done in response to the province's requirements that an interim housing needs report be completed last year. This is a part of the general suite of planning regulation changes that they introduced and adopted in 2023. So the report in your package today, and you'll be hearing from the consultant, was funded by the Regional District of Nanaimo, and it was completed on behalf of the member municipalities. So this report was specific to the town of Qualicum Beach, but the consultant prepared reports for the others as well. So I will turn it back to you, Mayor Westbrook, and we can hear directly from Jamie Van Struth, the consultant that prepared the report. Thank you.
Good morning. Good morning, Mr. Van Struth. Can you hear us?
I can hear you just fine, yes. Thank you.
Thank you, and welcome to the meeting and via Zoom. So please proceed with your presentation. Do you
okay,
know
thank you very
council?
much.
Can you see us? Can you see us?
Yes, I can. Yes, thank you.
Okay. So I don't know if you can read the name tag, but we got Councillor Harrison on my far left, Councillor Skipsey, Councillor Vander, and Councillor Young. So please proceed.
Okay, thank you very much. We have a PowerPoint presentation that I will share with you in one moment. And just to note, I'm here with my colleague, Zach Messick, who will be co-delivering the presentation with me. Okay, I hope that comes up on your screen.
Yes, it is. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you. I think the background of this report was already largely covered by Mr. Sales. As mentioned, following up on a mandate of the province released in June of last year, that they required every local government in the province to do an interim update to their housing needs assessment. So most of the analysis that we undertook as part of this is simply following the formulas prescribed by the province and the data sources that they required us to use. I'll talk a bit more at the end about the next steps, but there's 3 main components to the work that we did. The first part, as I just mentioned, is doing the calculations of interim housing need in 6 different categories, and we'll go through what each of those are. At the end of that process, the provincial formulas give you an estimated number of total units of housing need, and it's just a number of units. There's no additional detail or characteristics of those units provided. So when we were discussing doing this work with the RDN and with the municipal staffs that we worked with, we decided to do a little bit of additional custom analysis to provide some of those characteristics. So based on some of the demographic characteristics of projections and some other factors, we took the total number of units from the provincial formulas and created estimates for single family versus multifamily demand, as well as need by number of bedrooms. And I'll take you through that as well later in the presentation. The final element of this is also required by the province, is some statements. Largely, we're taking the information provided to us by the municipality, statements on municipal policies and recent initiatives that support housing development near transportation infrastructure, as well as initiatives that reduce overall housing need. And we were provided that information by Mr. Sales, who we worked with throughout the project. So I mentioned there are 6 components to the interim housing need. I'll briefly touch on these, and then Zach will give you a bit more detail on the results under each of those. The first is extreme core housing need. So this is a technical definition adopted by StatsCan and CMHC. It refers to people who are spending at least 50% of their income on housing, as well as there is some deficiency in their housing. It may not be large enough for their family, so it could be a family with 3 children that only has a 2-bedroom unit or something like that. It could be a unit that's in major need of repairs. So there's some issue with the unit plus 50% or more of their income being spent on it. Component B, persons experiencing homelessness. This one is fairly straightforward. It's based on the count of homelessness that's done through surveys. Component C, this one is interesting, suppressed household formation. So this refers to due to the escalation of housing prices and other issues with housing supply across British Columbia, the sense is there are actually households that do not exist, that otherwise would have created separate standalone households, but people may be living together. You may have young adults living with their parents longer. You may have adults choosing to co-occupy a space instead of having their own separate household. So this is a method to attempt to estimate how many of those additional households would have been created under a more neutral or standard housing market. Component D is based on population and housing projections. So we were required to use the latest projections from BC Stats. They have projections for each municipality. So we use the projections for Qualicum Beach over the next 5 years and over the next 20 years. Component E is an adjustment for rental vacancy. So the idea here is that sort of a neutral, healthy rental market has 3% vacancy. If the current vacancy rate is less than that, how many additional units would you need to raise the vacancy rate to 3%? Most of this data is not specific to the municipality. I believe it's, in this case, it's for the Parksville census agglomeration, which combines Parksville, Qualicum, and the rural area in between. And component F, this is an adjustment for municipalities. So basically it's a multiplier of several of the other components. The idea behind this one is the first number of components are just sort of getting you up to a sort of a minimum standard of meeting the need. Component F is how many additional units would you need to create a more of a overall healthy housing market with maybe moderation in housing prices, more options for people if they need to move for a job or other factors like that. And we'll take you through some more details on that as we go along. And these are the results. So just at a high level, there's a 5-year need and a 20-year need. Over 20 years, the projected need for Qualicum Beach is about 2,400 units. Over 5 years, 726. And I will turn it over to Zach, and he's going to take you through some bit more detail on each of those 6 components.
Thank you, Jamie. Hi, everyone. Zach Messick here, Senior Associate on the Economic Advisory Team at Deloitte. As Jamie mentioned, I'll be walking you through some more of the detailed results and methodology for each of the 6 components that make up the H&R method, as outlined by the province of BC. The first component, as Jamie alluded to, is the extreme core housing need. And this refers to households spending more than 50% of their income on shelter costs. It's the technical definition. And this metric is seen as crucial for assessing the housing affordability and overall accessibility. So the data comes from the last 4 census reports, and it focuses on owners and renters in ECHN extreme core housing need. We take the average across those 4 census reports and multiply the ECHN rate by the total number of households, both owners and renters. We then add those up to get the 20-year total need, which you see as 136. And then simply divide by 4 to get the 5-year need, and those totals are shown in the bottom table. Moving on to the next component, we are looking at persons experiencing homelessness. So this measure provides a quantifiable way to address the housing supply needed for this vulnerable population. And we specifically are relying on data from the Integrated Data Project, which is available on the province of BC's BC Stats website. And We basically gather a couple of different metrics here. We start by getting the local population share, just simply dividing the local population by the regional population. We take the regional PEH, person experiencing homelessness, rate from the IDP report, and then we multiply it by the local population share. And that gives us a local estimate of what the households of or PEH, persons experiencing homelessness, would be in the local area. And then lastly, what we do is we just divide the 20-year need by 2 to get the 5-year requirement, which is different than the rest of the criteria from the H&R method, because this reflects a bit of a greater need for the vulnerable population. So it's assumed that there's a greater number of units needed in a shorter amount of time. The next component, as Jamie mentioned, is component C, which is a suppressed household formation. And once again, this refers to households that aren't able to form due to a lack of affordable housing. We rely on the 2006 census data to estimate this, first by gathering primary household maintainer data on age and tenure. We also use the most recent census report and gather the population estimate. We take the 2006 headship rate and apply those rates to the most recent population data, and this gives us the number of potential households. We then subtract the current number of households in 2021 from the potential households that we calculated, and this gives us the number of suppressed households over the course of 20 years. And we see that they are summed across age categories in the bottom right at 375 over 20 years. And this one is also divided by 4 to get the 5-year need at 94 units. Moving on to component D, anticipated household growth. So this measure quantifies the additional households needed for a growing population, and it actually relies on projections that were done by the province of BC on their BC Stats household estimates and projections tool in combination with census data. And essentially, the easiest way to understand this component is that it relies on taking an average of 2 different scenarios that are calculated. So those would be the local household growth scenario and the regionally based household growth scenario. And then we simply just take the average, and that gives us the 20-year need in the top table. And then the projections are taken over a 20-year time frame, of course, for the first estimate. And then in the bottom, we simply take the projections over 5 years. So you see that we have 1,206 for 20 years and 406 total for the 5-year. Turning over to the next component, E, the rental vacancy rate, which again refers to the quantity of housing units necessary to raise the rental vacancy rate to 3% and aims to reflect a more balanced supply of available rental housing. We first start by gathering local vacancy rates data from CMHC, the Canadian Mortgage Housing Corporation. We then calculate the local occupied rate, simply subtracting the vacancy rate from 100. And then we are able to determine the number of units needed for both the target and local vacancy rates. And the total units that are needed over the 20-year is simply the difference between the local and target vacancy rates, which again is shown in the final column for 11 over 20 years, and then 5 years is 3. You'll notice that they don't divide evenly across 4 years. This is just due to there being odd numbers and a bit of rounding in absolute numbers when we are trying to when we report the housing units themselves. All right, and then the final component is the demand buffer. And this is the number of housing units that reflect the additional demand for housing within a community beyond the minimum units required to address the local housing need. It helps account for the number of units needed to meet the quote unquote healthy market demand. And the formula for this is quite simple. We simply take the sum of components A, B, C, and E, and we exclude component D. And then we apply what is called the demand factor, which can be understood as a ratio between the price of housings and the density of housing, which was available on BC Stats website. So this demand factor at 1.14 is simply multiplied by the total 573, and that would give you the total new units for additional housing demand at 656 over a 20-year time frame. And then once again, we simply just divide over 4 to get the 5-year total need. I'll pass it back over to Jamie, who will walk you through the supplementary analysis, and we'll conclude the report. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Zach. So the next part was to take those total number of units of need and estimate the bedroom count and the split between single family and multifamily. So we did that a bit of a different way for each of the 6 components. I don't need to go into the details of each of those calculations. Some of them are fairly standard approaches. So for example, category D, the household projections. There's a standard method in doing household projections to look at how a population demographics change over time. The requirement for housing evolves over someone's lifetime. So a 40-year-old has a different housing need on average than a 75-year-old, just based on typically having a larger household, often have children, where a 75-year-old typically has a smaller household, more likely to be in an apartment, needs fewer bedrooms, that sort of thing. So when we look at the demographic projections over time, we can use those changes to estimate how many different types of units we need. And that type of information was used, applied also to category C and category A. Category B, we did a bit of a different approach. Just the person's experiencing homelessness. Of course, homeless people aren't just single people. Sometimes there can be families or couples or different combinations of people that might live together if there was a housing unit available for them. But we didn't want to underestimate the need for the housing component or the homelessness component. So we assumed 1 rental apartment required for each of the homeless counts. The other categories were just based on extrapolating what's currently happening. So category E, rental vacancy rate adjustment, we just extrapolated the current characteristics of rental units in Qualicum Beach. We need this many extra units. We just applied the same characteristics going forward. The result of this analysis is we take our 2,400 units of need over 20 years, and you can see that the split by bedroom count. The largest category is 3 bedrooms, followed by 2 bedrooms. So combined, the 2 and 3 bedrooms is about 3/4 of the total. There's a smaller percentage, just over 10% for the smallest units, 0 or 1 bedroom, and the largest units, the 4+ bedroom. It's not on the slide here, but just if for your interest, and I followed the discussion earlier in the meeting, which I'm sure we'll talk about the bedroom counts. Comparing to the current census, these projections show a gradual evolution towards smaller units. So currently, for example, Qualicum Beach, 47% of units are 3 bedroom. These projections have 42%. Currently, Qualicum Beach has 16%. Are 4 bedrooms. Our need projection is 14%. So the demand for larger units we're suggesting is evolving a bit lower going forward. It's about the same for 2 bedrooms and a bit higher for 0 and 1. And in terms of the split between single family and multifamily, currently Qualicum Beach, about 80% of units are single family. You can see the split is much more even here, that we're projecting about 55% of the need single family and 45 multifamily. And similar shares at the 5-year level. Going forward, the intent of this analysis again was to fulfill your requirement for the province. Hopefully, also provide you some information that helps with your local housing planning and policy. The province does require updates to OCP and zoning bylaws if necessary to ensure that each local government can accommodate the units of need that we're projecting in this report. I'll defer to staff for any further details on exactly what the next steps would look like for you. And going forward, the province has set out these very prescriptive formulas for the first time, and the requirement was simply for every local government to do an update simply of the numbers. Most housing needs reports are more substantial than that, require some consultation and some other considerations. They're requiring full updates to housing needs reports every 5 years, so that would be required the next time by the end of 2028, which would incorporate results from the 2026 census, and then after that, every 5 years. So the 2031 census would require a full housing needs report update by the end of 2033, because it does take a couple of years for all of the housing data to be released from each census. And I believe that is all that we have. Yes, I'm happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Thank you for your presentation. Questions to the delegation? Councillor Harrison.
Thank you very much, Mayor Westbrook. So I just have a few. One is for the point-in-time count. So you've used the RDN point-in-time count for the homeless population, but there is a Parksville Qualicum Beach point-in-time count that BC Housing conducted. So why was the RDN, not the Oceanside point-in-time count, used for your data?
Do you recall, Zach, was that a specific formula requirement, or were we just not aware of the Qualicum Beach count? I don't recall. For the homelessness factor.
I don't recall seeing something specifically. Was it in the like specifically outlined in the H&R like methodology? Would it have explicitly said?
Yes, I mean, we can look into that. I was not aware there was a Qualicum Beach count, but the thing I would want to double check is it may be the province requires us to use the regional count and just spread it over the region. I'd have to double check that, but if not, we can look into that and circle back to staff.
Thank you very much. So a few more questions. Sorry, I geek out on census data, so this is my jam. This is a very informative report. The other thing for me is when you're looking at the rental units necessary to get to the 3%, if you look at just the town of Qualicum Beach, one of the issues is that Parksville has built a huge amount of rental recently. I believe they have something in the order of 1,400 units they're building. I don't know how much of that is rental, but a fair portion. But the town of Qualicum Beach and the CMHC data for 2024, there's no numbers that have been published yet, but for 2023, 2022, and 2021, all 3 years, the vacancy rate was 0.0%. So in your report, you're saying that in order to get to 3.0%, which is the target for a healthy vacancy, is the healthy vacancy rate is a 3.0% for your rental market. We need 11 units of rental, is that correct?
That's what the calculations are, yes. Yeah.
Okay. I'll agree to disagree on that one for a few reasons. One is I'm just looking at Craigslist right now for units that are available. There are 580 renter households in Qualicum Beach in the last census. There are currently 5 units available, which is less than 1% for the secondary and primary markets combined. If you're using Craigslist as a source. I know CMHC is limited because they don't include the secondary market. And so as a result, they only track 117 out of the total number of units, but I do think that CMHC data point is something that I just find 11 seems a little bit low when I do think there's more pressure in that one area. There's one minor typo in the report, but it doesn't really change things too much. And I'm trying to think of anything else. I think that's enough for now. Thanks. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Councillor Harrison. Further comments, questions? Councillor Vander.
Yes, thank you. This is more a general question about the report. The data does seem to be not very specific to Qualicum Beach, and I'm wondering if there's, and because that's the process that was set out by the province, I understand, but is there a better way for you and us to understand the specific needs of our community? Is there a way that we could look at this differently? Because it seems like we were just part of, well, there's this many people in this category in the region, and it's not really telling us what we need for our community. So I wonder if you have any suggestions about that.
Yes, I would, as an editorial comment, I would generally agree with you. I think what we're doing with this report is satisfying the requirement that you have to produce these numbers and to submit them to the province. I think when you do a full housing needs report, which you're required to do by the end of 2028, and I know has been done in the past, that you would get into much more detail of the specific situation in Qualicum Beach, and there would be some consultation with various community groups and people who may be having housing challenges, and you would get a lot more not just the numbers, but a lot more qualitative insight into what some of the issues and challenges may be. So this report, I agree, that's not really intended to get into those those qualitative issues, but in future, yes, there are ways to do that. I think more by talking to people instead of just relying on the published stats, which may not be specific to your situation.
Thank you. I did also have a question on page 204, an R numbering system. I'm not sure what it would be on your numbering system. But for the last paragraph, you're essentially saying that the town needs, my understanding is what's being required of us is that the town needs to be able to accommodate this number of units within the OCP and the zoning bylaws by the end of this year. Not that these units actually need to be built. So we are well, my understanding is we are well within our bounds to accommodate this number of units with the changes to the zoning bylaw with the multi-family, I can't even, the MMHU, so I just wanted to understand that that's correct, and perhaps either Mr. Sales or the consultants could tell us what the scoop is on that. Thank you.
Mr. Sales.
Thank you. Through the chair to Councillor Vander. So the consultant, I believe, also stated earlier, the official community plan needs to accommodate the housing projection for that 20-year period. We'll get into more details on this as we proceed through the official community plan review this year. But as Councillor Vander noted, the changes last year to upzone the single-family residential properties within the town, the theoretical capacity on paper significantly exceeds the projected housing needs. So from a purely paper exercise, yes, the town currently accommodates it. Thank you.
Sorry, Councillor Skipsey.
Thank you. I had a question. I'm not sure whether it's for the consultants or staff, but I was wondering about when does the 5 years start from, and if it's like when we approve, because we do have a number of units that are coming, will be occupied soon, and I just wondered if those would be included in the 5-year counting or not.
Mr. Van Struth, do you have an answer to that question?
I think from 2024 is my understanding, but it's not you're not required to construct those number of units within 5 years. As we stated earlier, it's simply being able to accommodate them. So if you're already covered, it's so the time frame, putting a 5-year time frame on it is more for your information, I think, and highlighting the need in the near term. But there's no real consequences or deadlines or timelines that's required attached to that.
Mr. Sales, any thoughts on that?
I think Mr. Van Struth articulated it perfectly. Our obligation is not to construct the units, it's to accommodate them through our zoning. Thank you.
Thank you. That concludes. Okay, Mr. Councillor Harrison.
Sorry, I just wanted to follow up one thing with Councillor Van Oek, just to get real clarity, because I think she raised a good point. With the Bill 44, would the gentle density, which it calls for, the SHMOO, sorry, I just love that word, I guess, would that qualify as single family or multifamily? Because if it doesn't qualify as single family, then we'll have to essentially zone that many new single family lots, which is actually a fair bet given our land base. So does that qualify as single family homes, or if you're doing a duplex or a triplex, or is that only multifamily in the needs report definitions?
Thank you. Through the chair to Councillor Harrison. So the requirement to accommodate the projected housing need in our zoning is the overall number. So for example, it's a 5-year need, it's a 20-year need. The breakdown of different unit types that Mr. Van Struth and his team have provided is kind of above and beyond. It's additional information. And I think it will be very useful to the town in the official community plan review as we review policies, because it's not just a numbers game in terms of meeting the needs of our community for housing. Thank you.
Thank you. And I think most people are aware that even though Bill 44 was very encouraging for communities to start building more units, the housing starts actually declined from the year before. And I understand in Alberta, where they created incentives, the housing starts went up. So I'm not sure if we're going about it the right way. And I mean, we, as a provincial government and local government, you can't make people build, and you can't make them put the lands available and say, okay, I'll build a fourplex on my home. So there's a lot of work to be done, but I appreciate the report. It gives it a kind of a pulse of where we're at, especially with people who are experience homelessness or suppressed living, as you call it. So thank you for your report, and I just need sorry me, I need a motion to receive the report. Councillor Skipsey, Councillor Harrison, further discussion? Councillor Harrison.
Yeah, just if, I know from my recollection of the report from staff, it did mention that there'd be a little bit of further work with the community to just sort of nudge the models a little bit. So this isn't just essentially done and complete. Will there be any sort of back and forth just to see if there could be a little bit more clarity over the next few months? Thanks.
Mr. Sales.
Thank you, Mayor Westbrook. Through the chair to Councillor Harrison. This report is complete for its intended purpose, which is to fulfill last year's obligations to provide the report. However, through the official community plan review, we will be engaging the community to explore those detailed housing needs, like who do we need to accommodate, what scale, what type. So the answer is yes, we will be engaging the community, but through the official community plan review and not through a subsequent iteration of this report. Thank you.
All right.
Yeah, and again, I'm not trying to be hard on the consultants, but I am looking at the 2046 BC stats projection for the population of Qualicum Beach, and it's 1,887. So even if we use the 9,303, which is our current population in 2021 in the last census, that's average household size in town is 2.0, so just half of that, 1,500-ish, and then that's about 760 units, not 2,000 units. So that's just why I was checking, is that if we're doing more of a regional base for population projections and then taking our proportional share, it might be a different number. We are the slowest growing community in the entire region by a significant margin, roughly 1/3 less than the next fastest growing, which is Area F.
Thank you. So with that, a motion to receive the report, even though we already have it, just for the record. And it was moved and seconded. Further discussion? All in favor? Opposed, if any? Carried. Thank you, Mr. Van Struth, and your associate. I forget who you had with you. But thank you both for your presentation. Thank you.
Thank you.
I think we're also having a presentation via Zoom regarding the fleet and how we make it greener. Mr. Sales.
Yes, thank you, Mayor Westbrook. I'll briefly introduce this item. So in May of last year, the town issued a request for proposals to undertake a fleet greening and modernization project for the purpose of assessing the town's need in terms of the types of vehicles, the quantity of vehicles, and also exploring opportunities to reduce the town's GHG emissions, greenhouse gas emissions, through either replacements or upgrades over time. So Innotech Fleet Solutions was awarded the contract for this work, and we have the privilege today of hearing from Mr. Stephen Wiebe of Innotech Fleet Solutions. So I will return the chair to, or you always had the chair, you've clarified before. However, I'll pass it back and we can hear from Mr. Wiebe. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Sales. Welcome, Mr. Wiebe. We're looking forward to hear your report, and I see you're well prepared to be mobile behind you. So go ahead and start your presentation. And do you know the members of council? I can quickly introduce them. On my far right is Councillor Young, then Councillor Vander, Councillor Skipsey, and Councillor Harrison. You have the floor.
Excellent. Thank you, everybody. Luke, thank you for the great introduction, and nice to see all the councillors and yourself, Mayor, here today. I am here to present. Give me a moment to share screen. Share. So you should be able to see that. Okay.
Yes, we can see that, Mr. Wiebe.
Excellent, thank you. As Luke mentioned, I'm Stephen Weeb. I'm the founder and managing director of Initech Fleet Strategies. So this is an island-based consulting, fleet management and engineering consulting firm. So I want to say thank you for choosing island-based companies as well. And this project was to support the town's emissions reduction and electrification roadmap. The town's emissions goals are for an overall reduction of 50% emissions by 2030 and 80% by 2050. These emission targets are for the town as a whole and would include the fleet, the facilities, and any other emissions generating sources. So the project included several major scope items, baseline needs assessment, a development of a fleet right-sizing and electrification policy, a fleet modernization plan, which focused on the vehicles, and an infrastructure roadmap, of course, with the electrification piece. And finally, implementation guidance. So this project is in alignment with federal and provincial targets, including zero-emission vehicle regulations. So just to review those, all new light-duty vehicles are to be zero-emission by 2035, and 35% of new medium and heavy-duty vehicles are to be zero-emission by 2030. So federal and provincial governments have a substantial amount of incentives available to support these programs. The federal program provides up to $200,000 per vehicle. And a quick note here, there's two programs under that. There's one for light duty vehicles, which just a couple weeks ago on January 13th was noted as being paused. So that was $5,000 per vehicle. It's unknown whether that will be topped up or if it will be canceled. But the good news is that program does not impact the incentives for the medium and heavy duty vehicles, which are the significant ones. And on the provincial side, there's a program that funds up to $150,000 per vehicle. And both the provincial and federal programs can be combined. And finally, we've got a number of incentive programs for charging infrastructure and chargers with various programs out there, but up to $100,000 for a fast charger is available. And there is a combined grant and loan of up to 80% to help with increased capital costs, and this is through FCM. So this image is from the provincial roadmap to 2030, and really it's helping to show industry maturity. The image provides a visual where passenger and commercial vehicles fall on the technology maturity curve, and passenger vehicles are represented by the red car, and commercial vehicles represented by the red cement truck. So passenger vehicles are relatively mature at this stage, with the first mainstream cars being sold in 2010 to 2012, represented by early Teslas, as well as Nissan Leaf and some Ford Focuses. Whereas commercial vehicles are lagging, with the first ones in BC being sold in 2021 and 2022. So now by 2030, the province expects that passenger vehicles will be in the upper end of the deployment stage and commercial vehicles will be in the early deployment stage. I show this slide really to help outline that there's still some risks with the medium and heavy duty vehicles, such as technology maturity, resulting in reliability of the vehicles and service and support models that are in place to be able to keep those vehicles on the road. So we are still really in early days with the medium and heavy duty vehicles. So now we get into what was completed as part of this project. There was a fleet assessment done, and this was to baseline the town's fleet and how it compared to industry standards and other small fleets within BC. So this was done through interviews and data requests to understand how the fleet is used, the operational needs, and some of the data metrics around the fleet. So this information was then used to create this scorecard. And there's a few key recommendations that come out of this, including reducing the fleet size, better utilizing existing assets, investing in the fleet to replace vehicles in a more timely manner, which reduces the average age, and finally improve fleet data. So the fleet data tracking was noted as poor here. And that's because there's currently no data available for individual vehicle repair costs or lifetime costs, which are a key indicator for identifying optimal replacement cycles for these vehicles. There's also minimal fuel data for the vehicles. However, a tracking app has recently been implemented for fuel data, so that one should be resolved moving forward. Once the fleet assessment was completed, we could look at 2 EV transition scenarios. And the charts you're seeing here, these are 10-year capital cost charts for each scenario. They focus on vehicles only and exclude charging stations and electrical infrastructure, as we'll get to that in a little bit. And they do not include incentives. So that means it reflects worst case scenario, as incentives are not guaranteed. So on the left, you've got the baseline scenario, and this represents a like-for-like replacement of vehicles at industry standard replacement timeline. So like-for-like meaning if you currently have a gasoline vehicle, it's being replaced with another gasoline vehicle. So this chart shows capital costs only, and there's a $4.8 million capital spend in the first year, which of course is understandably significant for a small community. And the baseline scenario has a 10-year net present value of $23.8 million. So the net present value includes capital as well as operating costs. Then on the right-hand side, you'll see the optimized scenario, and this includes the total cost of ownership comparison for each vehicle. And that compares the incumbent fuel technology to electric. It also includes right sizing and replacement smoothing. So replacement smoothing is adjusting the replacement year for a more feasible capital requirement, and also pushes out that first year that we saw in the baseline scenario. So the first year is reduced to 1.6 million in this case, and half of that is a tanker for fire. 2030 also has a significant spike, and that is due to another fire apparatus that's due for replacement. So the 10-year net present value for this case is 17 million, and there's a reduction there, which is expected as right sizing reduces the fleet size and electric vehicles that are purchased where the total cost of ownership is projected to be less. All right, so now that we've settled on an optimized scenario, we can use that to analyze the infrastructure requirements. And there was an assessment completed at 4 sites: Public Works, Parks, the Fire Hall, and the airport. Now, recognizing that some of these sites are aging and there's uncertainty around their future, or whether they'll be redeveloped and where, we developed a plan where no BC Hydro service upgrades are expected to be required. And this, of course, would save the town the expense and time required for these upgrades. So the only upgrade that is required is at the airport. And this upgrade is required in order to charge an electric airplane that's being considered. And that was outside the scope of the plan, but the infrastructure assessment was done as part of this project. So there's also a provision for a fast charger to be installed at either the fire hall or parks in 2030. And this would become the fast charging hub for the town vehicles. The fire hall was selected as it's a newer building with sufficient infrastructure, electrical infrastructure in place already. And also important to note that for this plan to be successful, the charging for any EVs would need to be done in an actively managed manner. So what this means is, especially at Public Works, plugging in the EVs every night and using network chargers with power sharing. So power sharing is basically a way of reducing the output of those chargers, and it sustains that lower output over the entire night. So next we can start to form an entire strategy. So the core strategy for this project is really focused on a balanced approach to meet your emission reduction targets, reduce the risk to service, especially for any emergency services such as fire or snow clearing, and to minimize costs. So the strategy is more than just electrification, and the full strategy includes implementation of the optimized scenario, including supporting infrastructure and charging stations, use of renewable diesel, which alone can cut emissions by up to 85% for diesel vehicles, collection of carbon credits, which are directly related to the use of EV vehicles and provide additional revenue sources for the town, and the review and application for eligible incentives. With this strategy now defined, we can start to look at what are the emission reduction potentials for the strategy as a whole. So the emission reductions you're seeing on this slide are for, again, it's for fleet only, not the complete town emissions. And for 2030, you'll see a total reduction potential of greater than 50%, and that's dependent on how much renewable diesel is used. And then 2050 is greater than 80%, again, depending on the use of renewable diesel. So the next column over is the optimized scenario. That's electrification only and the potential reductions there. And then the next one, LCFS. So this is the low carbon fuel standard, which is a regulation in BC that requires fuel suppliers and distributors to reduce the emissions in the fuel. And the town would be eligible for this without doing anything. Your current fuel supplier will have to meet these emissions for 2030 under this regulation. And then finally on the right, we have renewable diesel, again, just showing what the potential reductions are there for diesel vehicles only. So finally, we have estimated costs for this project. There's a fair amount going on this slide, but I know that costs are a key consideration, so wanted to provide several different ways to look at it. So you've got the baseline scenario, and you've also got the recommended strategy. And going left to right, each of the columns, you've got incremental CapEx for the vehicles. Next is incremental CapEx for the chargers. And next one is total CapEx. So that's not going to be incremental, that's total. And next is number of vehicles to be replaced, and you'll see those are reduced under the recommended strategy, and that's due to this replacement smoothing and the right sizing. And next to that, you have the net present value, and this one again is reduced. And then finally, the carbon credit potential. So that's showing what that revenue potential could be. So the full strategy shows a reduced CapEx, a reduced NPV, and additional revenue potential from carbon credits. And to reiterate, these costs do not include any incentives. So any that the town is eligible for would reduce these costs further. And then as a final note, these costs and a lot of the baseline scenario were developed based on industry standards, so not necessarily the current practices of the town today for replacing vehicles. Which means that even with the incentives, additional investment in the fleet is expected and encouraged. So that brings me to the end of the presentation today, and I really want to thank you for your time considering this, and just want to say it's really been a pleasure working with the town staff on it. They've been engaging, they've been interested in the work we've been doing, and yeah, I'm hopeful that this project is helpful for them moving forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Weeb. Any questions to the delegation? Councillor Harrison.
Thank you. Just a few questions, Your Worship. So firstly, in terms of the renewable diesel, what are the supply chains on Vancouver Island? And if multiple jurisdictions are going to be pursuing this, will the scaled up supply be able to meet the demand?
So you will need to work directly with your fuel supplier on this, but there are a large number of fuel supply chains on the island. And if we back up 3 years ago, supply was a challenge with renewable diesel. It's no longer a challenge. So it shouldn't be a concern receiving that.
And then just a second follow-up, my apologies if it's in the report and I missed it, and I'm just really sleep deprived and a bit slow. Would you be suggesting that we transition for some of the more heavy-duty vehicles towards electrics or towards hybrids more generally?
In general, there's not a lot available on the market for hybrids for heavy-duty vehicles. There's some niche projects. So what I've provided is really an analysis for the available vehicles on the market today and any projected vehicles that would be on the market in the future. But I think the real benefit of a strategy here is providing the financial planning tools so that you can save for the capital costs, and then make that decision at the time. It's very difficult to look forward 5 years and say, you should be purchasing a hybrid vehicle as opposed to an electric vehicle. We're still in early days.
And just the reason I'm doing that is when we had the Public Works open house, I spent a fair bit of time talking to the mechanics for the town who service the trucks that we have, service our fleet. And I specifically asked them about electric versus hybrid. And the reason that they brought that up is that it's not an annual, year-long issue, but during events where you have, say, a multiple-day dump of snow, they recommended that, from what they've heard talking to other staff in local governments in the area on Vancouver Island, that some went fully electric and then for those work trucks and tried to actually go back to hybrid because they found during the heavy snowfall, having the vehicle, having to charge, took it essentially out of commission for a while when it needs to be operating. But the overwhelming majority of time you're running off of batteries, so you're getting that benefit the majority of the time, and just that few times a year where you can't afford to have a vehicle not operating, you get the best of both worlds. But that was just the feedback I heard from them. Again, they're the experts, not me. So that's why I was just sort of raising that, is that I thought that was very interesting feedback from them. But I do think overall, like to your point, this isn't getting too nitty-gritty into which vehicle replaces which vehicle. It's just big picture, how do we look at getting as much electrified as we can? So I really appreciate that.
Thank you. Councillor Skipsey.
Thank you. And thank you for your presentation. I did have a difficult time seeing the spreadsheet about the fleet that was on page 261, even with the magnifying glass. So I just wondered, how does this affect or impact us in this year? And I'm not sure if that's for the consultant or staff. And also, it's been suggested to us that perhaps we might want to look at leasing something for a year or two to wait for the technology to catch up, rather than investing in a gas-powered vehicle at this point and then having that for 10 or 15 years. And I wondered if that was any part of the considerations, or if you have any thoughts on that.
Start with you, Mr. Wee, but then I'll refer to Councillor Mr. Sales.
Yeah, I think for the first question around the spreadsheet, so that was provided to staff as a spreadsheet as well as part of the report. It's a bit difficult to do that. And you were asking about the financial considerations. I think staff would need to answer that in terms of what exactly was put into the budgets for 2025. And the report does show 2025, but it's a bit of a lag between when the analysis was done and when the financial approvals were done. And then relating to your second question around the leasing analysis, that was part of the scope of this project. And in general, if you're looking at leasing a vehicle for an entire 12-month period on an ongoing basis, typically it's not beneficial for you. There's some niche cases where it might be, but in general, it's not. The cases where you would want to explore leasing are going to be some of those shorter term programs. So if you've got a summer parks program where you're watering and you need extra vehicles for 4 or 6 months, you might want to look at those. And then even if you're piloting vehicles, that might be another consideration for leasing. It's just piloting to prove the technology.
And I'll ask Councillor Mr. Sales to add to that.
Thank you. If I could, I'd like to add to the financial discussion. So one of the recommendations in your package today is that this report be referred to the next budget cycle, because we are fairly advanced in this one, and it's so there's no recommendations with regard to budget today. I would note that there will be reports later this year, either in with regard to the policy. There's a draft policy that was developed by Mr. Wiebe for consideration by council, and also some major purchases potentially, such as a garbage truck. So there is more discussion happening this year, but in terms of the significant financial implications, they would need to be referred to next year's budget process. Thank you.
Councillor Young.
Going back to renewable diesel, you mentioned that it isn't recommended, but there are vehicles, like for instance, Mercedes does a Blue Tech diesel automobile, and that is supposed to lower the emissions coming out. Is that something that we could be using as well in our fleet upgrade?
Mr. Weeb.
So great question, and I think this is one that confuses many people in the industry. I'm going to get a bit technical here. So when we talk about emissions, there's two different things that we think about. One is tailpipe emissions, and one is the embedded carbon in the fuel. So renewable diesel or biodiesel, and keep in mind those are two separate different types of fuels. They're reducing the embedded emissions in the fuel. So your local community pollution from a tailpipe perspective doesn't change. But when you look at a global emissions reduction, you're reducing the sources from those that are used to develop those fuels. So you're reducing the total emissions emitted into the global atmosphere. And then the second one, which is tailpipe emissions. So Blue Tech specifically, that is Mercedes after treatment system, which cleans up the tailpipe emissions. And all automotive manufacturers have to abide by the latest regulations for tailpipe emissions. So Mercedes, GM, Ford, they're all going to meet the same regulations. So you're already taking advantage of those, and only vehicles that meet the latest regulations are sold, but they still do have tailpipe emissions. I hope that clarifies it for you and I didn't get too technical there.
Thank you. Councillor Harrison.
Thank you very much, Your Worship. So as our town is a relatively small town surrounded by another small town and a regional district, has there been any discussion of maybe sharing vehicles? I know we've talked about this in the past with the fire hall, but for some of these very specialized vehicles that get used, I saw the annual mileage for some of them was like 15, 20 miles. Would that be something where maybe we would want to collaborate with our neighbors and say, okay, we all need this eventually, so how about we share the costs and share the responsibility?
I'm not sure if that's a question directly. I think it's for staff. So any questions to our Mr. Weeb for his presentation? Go ahead.
So the last one is also too in the flurry of yesterday, which was welcome back to the circus. There was significant cuts to the Biden administration's EV incentives. So that was something that Trump just basically wiped out. Will it have an impact on the long-term projections for costs, as that's likely to escalate the cost of EVs overall over time?
So that is a great question, and I think one that everybody is still waiting to see. So with the talk around tariffs and job impacts and Canadian auto manufacturing, and Canada supplies a lot of parts, automotive parts down to the US, I think we have to wait on that one to see how it all plays out.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments, Councillor Skipsey?
Well, I just wanted to note that after the other recommendations are done, I did want to refer this to the Environment and Sustainability Committee, because it is quite a technical report, and I think there's quite a bit of expertise at that table, so they might have some input for us. So I'm just giving you the heads up.
Mr. Weeb, thank you for your presentation, your very thoughtful answers to our questions, and how you lead by example. You and Mr. Sales seem to be on the same page. They bring the bike right to work, and yours even in the office. So thank you, Mr. Weeb, and have a wonderful day, and thank you for all your advice.
Thank you very much. Have a great day.
Thank you. So on the question, sorry, Ms. Rella.
Sorry, Your Worship, could we have a motion to go past 3 hours?
Past 3 hours already?
Yep.
So moved.
Seconded. Discussion. All in favor? Okay, we can carry on. So we'll deal with these recommendations. And then there was a question which is quite interesting about sharing fire equipment, as Councillor Harrison indicated earlier, and also another motion by Councillor Skipsey. But I'd like us to move these recommendations that we received a report, which already we have, but just for the record, could I have a motion to that effect? Councillor Skipsey, Councillor Young, discussion, all in favor, opposed, carried. And that we also refer this to the modernization strategy for 2026 financial planning process. So Councillor Skipsey, Councillor Harrison, discussion, all in favor, opposed, carried. And Councillor Skipsey, you have another motion?
I would like to move that the Fleet Greening Modernization Strategy Report be referred to the Environment and Sustainability Committee for consideration and comment.
Thank you. And a seconder, Councillor Vander Valk, discussion. All in favor? Opposed, if any? Carried. Thank you. I think those were all the motions, but Councillor Harrison did touch on I think was a good question, and perhaps since we have our fire chief here, is can we talk about, and maybe you should introduce what you were saying about this.
It was actually not so much for the fire chief, just using it as an example, because I know in the past we've shared some vehicles through the fire hall, I believe, but more for our fleet, for operations. And this would actually be Mr. Dickinson going back into the chair. Sorry. But have we looked at for some of the, like they're talking about phasing out some of the vehicles. So I'm sure one or two might be phased out, but for some of the other ones which are edge cases, have we looked at maybe collaborating with the city of Parksville for some of our fleet to reduce costs for both parties?
And I would suggest just a brief response, because we may have to ask for a report later when we get into more budget discussion later this fall. Mr. Dickinson.
Thank you, Your Worship. I can be very brief. We have some equipment that is very specialized that might be applicable to that, say a vac truck, but we use it so much they would never get to use it. But you may think if there's a future service, or we do a service review and we want to buy sweepers, for instance, where we would only use them, say, 10 days a year, that might be something that we could share.
And we'll leave the fire department question to Mr. To our fire chief. If you want to care to respond about how we can share some of the equipment, because I agree, I've seen some very expensive equipment but very low mileage, so I think it would be good for all of us to hear if there's any way we can share those vehicles.
Thank you, Your Worship. So fire trucks are required to be within travel distance and travel time of the areas they're going to protect. The distance between ourselves and Parksville or other stations would be similar. The travel distance exceeds that limit. Where we do have shared services, or we don't have auxiliary or second line engines, we use our mutual aid partners for that. So instead of having another engine in reserve in case one of ours goes down, that's where we can use our mutual aid partners to take that reserve part over. So in essence, we are sharing equipment probably more in the reserve end than the frontline stuff.
Thank you. Well, that concludes this item. The next item is the authorization of the emergency services application, or a grant application. And who would like to start off with that? Mr. Sales.
Thank you, Mayor Westbrook. So through the town's partnership with the City of Parksville, Emergency Management Oceanside, we collaborate on grant applications. So this grant application before you today is a support resolution from the town to the City of Parksville so that they can apply for a grant to benefit both parties through Emergency Management Oceanside. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions about that? Can I have a motion to that effect? Councillor Harrison, Councillor Young, discussion? All in favor? Opposed, if any? Carried. Thank you. Ravensbourne Lane, who would introduce that item? Mr. Sales.
Thank you, Mayor Westbrook. The next item is a development permit application for a property at the airport, 1000 Ravensbourne Lane. I do have a few slides, but I'll continue to introduce it while those are being pulled up. So the airport is designated as what we call a form and character development permit area, which requires that any developments there need to meet form and character guidelines, which are specified in the official community plan. So at the airport, the guidelines are relatively utilitarian in comparison to the more complex form and character guidelines in the commercial center, where the village neighborhood guidelines apply. Next slide. It's probably a few topics through, because there was other things in the presentation. So the application before you today is only for the form and character. It doesn't address the actual right to occupy the land, which is consideration of a lease, which council considers leases in camera. So there are two recommendations before you today. One of them is with regard to the form and character development permit area, which in the opinion of staff, this application does comply with the guidelines, and there is a detailed analysis of those guidelines in the staff report. And then the second component of it, which is embedded in the same resolution, acknowledges that the actual development permit cannot be issued until council has already considered the lease. So in other words, that would be considered at a separate meeting, and those are in camera. The slide before you just highlights where on the airport property this is. So the airport has 3 rows, A, B, and C, C being farthest from the runway. The proposed site is in the middle in row B, and it's adjacent to a hangar which is constructed. Next slide. So it is a 4 aircraft hangar, and you see there that there's 4, those would be the man doors. Airplanes are much too large to go through those. So it is relatively simplistic. It's a metal structure. You've seen applications for very similar structures in the past. Next slide. Oh, okay, so there's no more pictures. There are some more in your package. It's relatively simplistic, so not much eye candy in this proposal before you today. The recommendation is to authorize staff to issue the development permit subject to consideration of the lease. Thank you.
Thank you. I know planners have different views, but calling these things eye candy, I don't know about that. Any questions? All right. I have one question. On page 330, it talks about the buffer area, and that's in the pie shaped. And there's one of the pictures you showed as a photograph of that area with the buffer zone. It's in the package on page 329. Yeah, there you go. So when we had that pie-shaped property under consideration for a bus garage site, we felt we should have a buffer because there could be a lot of noise coming from the bus garage site so close to the Chartwell residential area. But that's a 100-foot wide buffer, and of course the bus garage went somewhere else, Harrington. And so we were thinking at one time that we didn't need that buffer, just like we haven't put it further up where those other properties are towards Bennett Road. So there was thought, and now we had some discussions about removing that buffer and putting it somewhere else where it was more appropriate, like protecting the creek below, and using that area for some kind of housing where people could buy a small portion and build a modular or mobile home or something to that effect. But keeping that buffer there would make that more difficult. And on this report, it shows that the buffer is almost, okay, that's going to stay there forever. And the other way that we thought we could get around, and you may remember when we tried to reconfigure that pie shape by pulling half of that point-shaped area around, so to speak, and add to the other part so it becomes more a rectangular-shaped property. And there would be no net loss of airport lands. And we did have support letters from both Qualicum First Nation and the News First Nation. So I just want to draw attention to that because I think it's a valuable piece of property that was going to be used for something that it never will be, and whether we could make that more useful by perhaps indicating that that buffer may not be there. And I'm just wondering what your thoughts about how we could accomplish that so it doesn't eliminate that potential use for housing. Mr. Seal.
Yes, thank you, Mayor Westbrook. So considering changes to the property to the north of the airport, it has been at the council table before for various types of uses, and I think the land use that you're contemplating would probably be a good discussion for the OCP. And so not directly relevant to the application before you today, but I've made a note of the comment, and I'll talk with with CAO Varela, and we'll find a good time to bring that back in the appropriate venue. Thank you.
Thank you. So did we get a motion to approve this request? Not yet? Okay. Councillor Harrison, Councillor Vander.
Moving the staff recommendation.
Pardon?
Oh, just moving the staff recommendation, just so we're clear what I'm moving.
Yep, I appreciate that. Thank you. Discussion. I thought when I read this, subject to a lease being agreed to, isn't that a little bit a cart before the horse, where if you don't have a lease, there's no point approving this? So how do you do that simultaneously?
Thank you, Mayor Westbrook. So the lease can be considered before the development permit or vice versa. In many ways, it would makes sense to consider the lease first. However, the specific wording of this doesn't direct staff to issue the development permit. It just authorizes staff. So at the time when the conditions are all fulfilled, staff would issue it. If council chooses not to approve the lease, the motion is essentially defunct and useless.
Yeah, great, thank you. Further discussion? All in favor? Opposed, if any? Carried. Thank you. I think that concludes council agenda, and I want to thank some of the folks who are in the audience to hang in there with us. I really appreciate that, and now I need a motion to adjourn. Councillor Skipsey, Councillor Vander, all in favor? We are adjourned. Thank you.